Good
We are
morning, Glenn.
live. Good
We are
morning.
live.
Good morning,
So because it,
Professor Marty.
thank you, Glenn. You too. In Japan here where I am, it's dinner time. So for you, it's morning time. So we're both on Earth Day, I believe.
Earth Day. Yes. I didn't know that before you told me. So that's perfect occasion to go into all this.
Happy Earth Day. And also I did post a song by Kenny Loggins called Conviction of the Heart on my Facebook. And I do kind of disagree that Earth Day is once a year when some religious ceremonies are many times a year. So I'm going to keep posting the same song every day and see if people kind of notice. Should be Earth Day every day. This version of Kenny Loggins' song that I post on my Facebook is not the best version to actually hear him say the words. I recommend people actually look up the lyrics of the words. But it is my favorite location that he sings this. We have Glenn here from Norway that I am only in my second live conversation with. And you live in a city that you prefer to take a boat, but there's a drive possible. About 30-minute boat ride, you said, from Oslo?
Yeah, that's right.
Capital.
Peninsula.
And I believe that it's not too remote a location, but it's a smaller city of about 30,000 population. You were saying?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, a lot of green areas too.
Yeah. Nice. I'm waiting for an invitation.
Yeah, you're welcome.
The Facebook group, thank you, called Ecology of Systems Thinking is where we originally met, and you've been a friend of mine on my Facebook, which is just a practicing platform for me to do a few blogs right now until I get better and go somewhere else. But you're also in another Facebook group called Global Challenges Collaboration, and you're an admin on this one, and you are inviting me to join, and there'd be some other interesting discussions. And I will be following up with that. Now, you were telling me before about your life, Glenn, that you have had various types of jobs, and they were in different industries or fields, and your studies were also a bit varied. So you called yourself a generalist. And I applaud that because I believe it develops various types of intelligence in a way that maybe people that are too specific in their studies or work cannot develop. So good for you. It was nice to see that about you. And you also have a YouTube channel called Walking in Wonder. And on there, I will be later on looking at some of your videos you suggested. You mentioned a lot of the ideas that you've been very interested in. You've defined them as super system. Now, you also told me when we talked about the concept of worldviews that your worldviews beliefs can be summed up in a way that you believe that humans, people, are capable of so much more than what they presently think they can do, or the majority of people think. And you also believe that aside from that, we are also part of something greater that is, yet to be properly defined, let's say, by the majority of people. So these are the things I've learned about you even more this week, and I appreciate knowing that about you, Glenn.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was a great introduction. So in introducing you, it's quite true that we got acquainted through this ecology of systems thinking group, and it was a video that you shared where you basically were just filming while walking, and you spoke. You actually spoke about this sense of isolation that sometimes people feel, and somehow I really had a lot of sympathy and interest with that, and also got this impression that you just seem like a generally very interesting guy, and that you were interested in many of the similar things. And so then we had a conversation, which was really interesting. We went through lots of questions, and you have also sent me a very nice little bio, which I think I'll just read exactly the way you sent it because it's well written, and it's about Professor Marty, which is your nickname or one of your nicknames. Besides, was it Doctor Humanix? Was that one as well?
Dr. Humanix, yes.
Yeah, So a man of many good nicknames. Professor Marty is of Canadian origin. However, as the only eco-centric humanist, he calls himself simply the man from Earth, which of course is perfect since this is Earth Day. He is more fluent in both of his birth country's official languages than most people he has met, while being oppressed living there for more than 4 decades. He is an independent scientist who focuses on the social sciences and the humanities. He seeks to specialize in learning increasingly more about the human condition, so as to improve his success at elevating the Homo communia's abilities at looking at themselves in the mirror and seeing their own true selves. He believes that the advancement of meta-psychology, which he defines as a sapient creature's ability to observe its own thoughts and feelings, and all in order to better self-actualize, could become his biggest contribution to the world of science. Currently still traveling the world of the Homo communia and with a very, very limited budget, all for the sake of these 4 purposes, which are seeking any Homo sapien or human community to connect with as a social creature. After more than 4 years, although he had found the Japanese macaque monkey, which was called Ampersandy for a short time, he is still searching, seeking also to establish himself anywhere where his continued growth is possible, collecting data for the sake of advancing his sciences of humanics, meta-psychology, eco-centric sustainability, and cultural repair, and for the sake of his own survival, as social mobility now seems to be one of the rare remaining ways to alleviate his suffering from species alienation, which is a form of misery that comes to the minority due to HSD, I'm not quite sure what that means, being the illness of the majority. In any case, he does not want to sell his humanity away for the sake of unsatisfying and devolving types of social connections, which I guess means that you are interested in evolving social connections, which are why we're here today. So, yeah, good to meet you, Martin.
Thanks, Glenn. Hearing you read my bio, I am finding myself arrogant. Some people say that, but I did, man, that guy sounds arrogant. But I also thought you'd make a great radio announcer, especially reading stuff that is not part of the regular vocabulary of people to explain and create interest, for the listeners. So thanks for doing it that way.
Yeah, cool.
So, Glenn, as you know, I invited you to do this conversation, and I don't think I was specific. I think I was hiding my motive to have many conversations like this, but you're starting to show that same kind of motivation and excitement. And it's in part from what you read about my bio is that I ran out of role models a long time ago, or people to stimulate my mind and participate in interesting conversations with. And as a creature who wants to continue to self-actualize and evolve my thoughts and correct them or grow them or change them. And this is partly in relation to my worldview, which is pretty impressive with you because you were describing your own bio as, growing and changing and evolving and developing since a young age. So that means you've already at a young age, like myself, remembering having thoughts similar to this already at a young age, is you've been, demonstrating some abilities at metapsychology, observing your own thinking and your own evolution. So I want to keep evolving more. So this kind of conversation has been lacking in my life. So I'm pretty excited that you also enjoyed the first conversation that we had, and that you were looking forward to this idea, which we hope is going to be one of many where we might even invite other people to participate on certain topics, just to promote the growth of, not just cultural evolution, but personal evolution and intellectual evolution in ways that we might very likely find harder and harder venues for, including, post-secondary education in the near future. So I thank you a lot for this opportunity, Glenn.
Great, yeah. And I think on that note, I can also introduce a theme which we have discussed beforehand, and that is that today, this conversation, we want to focus our attention really on this general theme of cultural evolution and evolution of minds, and where information and language and conversations clearly play a crucial part. And the inspiration that we're taking as a point of departure here is a talk by a guy called Daniel Dennett, where he described his recent book, which is called From Bacteria to Bach and Back, The Evolution of Minds. And actually, I haven't read the whole book yet finished. I've read more than half of it, and I've listened to several of his talks. And in my opinion, Daniel Dennett is one of the really genuine thinkers of the modern age, a true philosopher with a great knowledge from many different fields, and a long and serious search, which has itself evolved very far and has brought him to a point of view where he is very interested in evolution of the mind, the human mind, through culture, where the transmission of information structures is so central to, as a kind of a key to understand how humans work, how culture works, how nature works, and how the interaction works between what we could call intelligent systems. So this is also a reason why this should be very appropriate for the ecology of systems thinking group, because this clearly falls right at the heart of systems thinking, and maybe what you would call meta systems thinking as well. And so that seems to be a very good point of departure to begin from. And I have quite a bit of notes, and I thought I would actually go through a few key points, but maybe you have something that you would want to add relating to this as well, because you just watched the video.
Glenn, if you want to start with some notes, we can do that. We could start whatever way. It's up to you, and go ahead. So this will prevent the reader from having to pause and just, I assume you're going to summarize a few of the ideas from the video that is a little over an hour.
Yes, exactly. So just sort of to briefly summarize some of the ideas, and then we'll just sort of naturally go from there and see where it goes. And we'll probably expand with a lot of our own ideas as goes on. But then it begins to describe the great tree of life and how 4,000 million years ago, on this great ball of life that we call planet Earth, there was these very simple organisms, uh, single-celled organisms, which include what we call bacteria. And then there was a very unique moment when two of these cells had an encounter. And what happened in that encounter was to change the history of life on this planet. Because instead of one of them engulfing the other, or them just bumping off each other, they went into a union where they joined forces, and then they became the first functioning multicellular organism, and which also turned out to be capable of surviving and replicating itself, so that this was actually the beginning of what is sometimes described as the Great Eukaryotic Revolution, because these bacteria were called eukaryotes. And this led to an explosion of new life forms on planet Earth, where plants, algae, fungi, sponges, corals, worms, spiders, insects, and then over time, mollusks, sharks, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, and then human beings eventually, after a very, very long journey. So that we, being here today, are the descendants of this 4,000 million year long drama of these life forms interacting. And as mentioned, something very big happened during that encounter between these first two cells. And there have also been other very great moments in this journey which have changed the journey itself. And we're probably right now in the middle of one of these moments, and possibly the most radical of them all. Another very big moment happened around about 100,000 years ago, or it came on gradually, but obviously then with human beings, the species of human beings having then already emerged. And this has been called the MacCready explosion. To just mention some statistics, if we go 10,000 years back in time, and then we ask how many percent of the vertebrate biomass on planet Earth is from humans and domesticated animals. 10,000 years ago, that was 0.1% of the vertebrate biomass. Today, it is 98%. And this doesn't involve bacteria and things like that, microorganisms, but in terms of mammalian life forms, humans and domesticated animals are now the vast majority of these life forms. So it basically means humans have completely taken over planet Earth in a sense. We have at least totally changed the whole life process on planet Earth. And we are, of course, today more than we've ever been before in number. And then there was this other, so why has this happened? This is obviously one of the questions that he asks. And the answer, the short answer, he describes with the following quote: "You can't do much carpentry with your bare hands, and you can't do much thinking with your bare brain."
This was a quote, I believe, from one of his students, I think.
Okay, yes. And the idea, the question here, the puzzle underlying this is, how is it that 86 billion neurons in a human brain, which in a sense are clueless about the whole brain, even though they're very competent in their own way, they're actually whole worlds of life in themselves, but how is it that those neurons can create a mind? And that's obviously a very, very big question. But the idea that Dennett offers is that humans have, in a sense, well-equipped brains because we have thinking tools. And thinking tools is what Dennett calls means. And these are certain structures which have been downloaded almost as an app in our brain. And this is where he uses the expression, it's an app that we download in our necktops. And he means that almost literally, because it truly is a sort of direct download when we take in information. At the same time, then it does emphasize that the human brain, while having certain characteristic similarities to a computer, is still a completely unique kind of a system because it doesn't even have an operating system. It has a totally different architecture as compared to the computers we use today. And at the same time, we can definitely see that there are, in a sense, applications or thinking tools or patterns which our brains can take in and begin to use, and where there can be a vast, even an ecosystem of such tools, where there's tools within tools within tools, where they assist one another, etc. And this, of course, has become the origin of language.
Glenn, if it's okay, I'll interrupt you because you're doing a great description of the video, but I think people might see the video after and get a lot of this. I'd like to get into some nitty-gritty debating of these ideas with you. One of the ones you might have mentioned, and I'm not sure if Daniel would say it or believe entirely like that as well, is the mind of neurons, developed maybe a human mind through memetics, and I think memetics affects it, but I think it's more the thinking tools. And I'm borrowing a little bit from Isaac Asimov here when I use the term humanics, when I want to say patterns, patterns mostly are particular tendencies for the minds to react or function, a little bit like the cybernetics maybe. So I think thinking tools, for me, like I've devised a humanics program. And I think one of the things I've wanted to do for a few months now, and watching this video again has made me remember I've wanted to do this, is I want to call it the humanics technology program. Because if we define the word technology properly, this applies as well. And it would also probably help, especially Asian students in a country where I am. There's a lot of Asian cultures that believe that the future is, to be defined as technology, but, not without humanity in there. So the thinking tools are also able to use the word technology when we teach them. And these thinking tools, a lot of them relate to observing our own thoughts and feelings and how we interact with others. So again, coming back to the theme of metapsychology, but also social structures and collective learning and, listening skills, critical thinking skills. So problem solving skills, conflict resolution skills, counseling skills, all these things, they relate to what for me would form a human operating system. So for me, I've designed this, and of course it would keep on growing with time. But right now I've designed it to be 250 hours of training over a year, part-time, and then a few weekends. So, but I can't find anybody to help me give this even for free. So, which leads me back to one of the things I would have started the conversation with, is I've debated for a while for me to pass on my messages to the world in a way that would be better received. And for me, I see the problems of the world need to be fixed by the majority, not the minority of people. So for me, of course, it wasn't about elitism or money, but spreading the ideas that I have for solutions to as many people as possible. They're altruistic, reasons for me to do this. They're not about personal gain. But in wanting to do this, I've had to sometimes choose between the loom and gloom or the hopeful scenario. Well, if I'm totally honest with people, in which I've decided to be, the hope is there, but the hope is for different things. Like a lot of people hope for maintaining the status quo, and that's just a denial. So for me, I've got the loom and gloom because I've got very little to lose. I don't have a wife or kids or a mortgage to pay. I'm traveling the world with very little money, as you said, and the money is not specifically intended for research funding. It's for my own survival. But my own survival is a case study for a human living his life a particular way based on an operating system of humanics that he does not want to let go of for the sake of social connections. And of course, as I am so different from the majority, which I believe suffer from HSD, which is Homo sapien domestication. It's how we devolve our brains through not only domesticating, other animals, but when we started domesticating ourselves, and a lot of it was religion and monetary paradigms that caused this, is we've lost, whatever maybe evolution was trying to do. Well, but listening to Daniel, I started thinking, because I'm a big supporter of quality over quantity, but I started thinking that even with memetics or cultural ideas that spread, sometimes I think before the good quality ones might settle in, is a lot have to be tried, and biological life has tried this a lot in the past. So I look at Greta, who is saying it like it is, the climate activist, young lady who I think is 16 years old now. And she is getting a lot of attention. I can't even get her to respond to me for a request to collaborate with her and offer her my free support and services, which would be great for me. Although my point of view is not entirely climate change, because for me, the biggest priority is not that we're at a tipping point with climate, is we're at a tipping point for successfully, before it's too late, adopting at least the first version of a successful human operating system. For me, that's the tipping point. We are going back down here. We are no longer, or very rarely, using the higher functions of our brains. And I wish there was research to prove this. And when I was in Norway, I actually contacted a Nobel laureate, but didn't get an answer, who specializes in the hardware of the brain, to try to work with her, considering myself an expert of the software of the brain, just to do research to demonstrate if over time, or in different parts of the world, if it's getting worse faster, is we are, especially when most countries I travel to don't have schools, they have domestication centers for their kids and for the staff to even domesticate each other. Otherwise, they don't fit in to meet their social needs. Well, I've been telling people, I think the last human child, the one that had the DNA, but that will never have the chance to develop the software of the mind to be human, was born maybe 50 years ago or more. So when I listen to Daniel, his entire talk is fairly positive. And then at the end, when there's questions, you hear more hard truths, right? Or you hear where he thinks things, like, for example, to take charge of how memes are spreading, the ones that are more counterproductive.
Yeah.
And he's saying that we're almost running out of time. That's an example of, the loom and gloom. But most of his message, for me, I would disagree, because you know, it almost says we're already, you know, at the opposite extreme of the intelligent creative designer stage, you know, and we're so far from that. And I think he understands probably this, but he's just overwhelmed with
Let's go
how
in.
much stuff we've done in a short amount of time. And
Yeah,
just to finish up this part, Glenn, is I'm worried that a lot of people with large followings, and Greta's an exception to this, she tells it like it is, but scientists like Dennett or other ones that are on the news or more well known, is I think they have to give the hard truths a little bit more if their you know, purpose is really altruistic, is they
yeah,
have to, you know, not just sell the seats, you know, to make a nice video, is they have to say, yeah, I think we are almost entirely finished proving that we failed as a species in some way. You know, he's saying what the potential is, but I think it's only in private conversation that he would say the wasted potential, or the, you know, the lack of opportunities is upon us very soon, where we will not be able anymore to even have the brain power or collaborative abilities like those first two cells, which for me is a great point to say Darwin is often misunderstood, and people want to say evolution is survival of the fittest, or bullying, or laws of the jungle, but it's actually that friendship or collaboration
mm,
from that long ago, from billions of years ago, that was actually responsible for, so a concept of collaboration or friendship, or let's try, I won't eat you, you don't eat me this time, and see
yeah,
what happens. And they already had so much complexity, these cells already, and that they
yeah,
merged their specialties together was the boom in evolution that led to us after this amount of time.
yeah,
But us, are we are we really that special? And I could hear a lot of human chauvinism in Daniel's statements, which for me is worrisome, because it's more part of the problem. It's not a real situation of what's happening with the majority of people around the world that he believes are so great. And
well,
again, how do we explain this? And my theory of HSD explains this. Thank you, Glenn.
definitely we will go into all this. We'll go into all this. Um, because yeah, the the thing is, what something that he would perhaps say about this is that short term, clearly there's what we could call parasitic needs, and this is what he warns about at the end, and where he really asks the Google employees to consider this very carefully. What are the unintended consequences of the apps and products and ideas that are launched? So clearly there's are dangers, and it's not hiding this. At the same time, looking at a larger evolutionary history, we can see that together with all of the great evolutionary leaps that have happened, there has always also been great species extinctions, and really a lot of chaos, and a great deal of wasted potential, just like you say. And that somehow that mechanism itself seems to be built into natural evolution. So that natural evolution over a longer time is very costly. It is
And this
very
is where
slow.
he was saying that evolution is evolving and learning, because I mean, the waste part, I mean, some people would say nature doesn't waste, things will get recycled. And he was mentioning a percentage, I think is 99% of individual creatures that lived were childless when they
Yes,
died.
that's right.
And now, if you look at the individual and not the species, you would say what a waste. But if you look at the species, well, they played a part in this growing, learning evolution, the
Yeah,
species. So again, you know, I don't have kids of my own, but I've been told I'm very good working with kids, and I want to continue doing that. And so my influence in memetics would be to help these kids, especially when their parents have no clue how to do this, is to promote them developing a human operating system. And but I think, you know, economics is now merged entirely with with education. So if these are two cells, one really is eating the other. They're not collaborating at all. So you know, it's an evolutionary or culturally dead end, this phenomenon of blending economics and education together. So it's quite sad to observe this and to see it get worse, and to actually see that around the world, I haven't done the research, but I'm pretty sure this is accurate, that more and more universities, especially to attract more money with international students, are giving, you know, masters of business programs instead of masters of ecocentric sustainability programs, which don't exist anywhere. I'd love to help create one. And it would be, you know, to prepare the new generation, not for an economy that will never happen, because there'll be plenty of crashes in most economic systems before then, but, and hopefully the same ones won't reemerge, but it'll be, they will not even know how to work as a team or communicate even in the same language efficiently, and much less solve the basic needs and problems of food and shelter, and you know, how to fix things. And this is one part that I disagreed with Daniel. I think he was saying that, or some people believe that comprehension is not as important. Well, I believe it is. And again, I guess I got to refer back to Isaac Asimov's stories, is that, you know, at a stage of society where, let's say, the nuclear power plants are starting to break down and nobody's trained to fix them, well, there's going to be, you know, the comprehension needs to be there, you know. So there needs to be not too much of a loss, or there needs to be a percentage of a culture or community that can maintain or that can refer as quick learners to, you know, the learning part they'll need to fix things that are breaking down, because over time, either biological or material things will break down, and you need to know how to fix them and repair them.
Can I just challenge that point? What
Yes.
if you have a mechanism which is very brilliantly cleverly designed? It is for just that situation when the nuclear plant breaks down, and all you have to do as a human is to push one button. But you have to push the button at the right time when it happens. So you have to
Yeah, but again,
aware. But is there comprehension?
But even Daniel,
is there comprehension there?
Well, again, that machine, we're going back to who created the creator here, kind of paradox, is that the word? And so that machine, even Daniel was saying, can break down. He was talking about gene sequencers and how sometimes people to save a buck, or, you know, the entire monetary paradigm, mental illness will get in there as well. And of course, you know, if people want to criticize AIs or computers gone bad, well, who programmed them, you know? And here's an idea that I also had, and I don't know if he mentions this in some of his other books, but if a computer, an AI, becomes kind of smart and wants to have a drive to self-actualize and continue to evolve like we have, and like how we define intelligence, and then they realize they are parasites to us, for example, that they're dependent on us for electrical supply or internet information input or whatever, then, you know, they'll want to separate from that. Now they will want to go from being a parasite to a symbiont, probably, you know, and not symbiont, but you know, collaboration starts with S, the word, I'm not saying the right word, but they will want to form a teamwork with us instead of a, you know, dependency. And if we don't notice and realize that, then they will, in their drive to evolve, they will want to become independent. Now, when they do, they will probably not want to destroy us. They don't need to destroy us, but it's only us that will be intimidated or scared, you know, because we never did our programming of our humanics. You know, we still suffer from our own species origin mental illness of paranoia, and everything's trying to eat us and kill us, and you know, military deterrent, you know, kind of thinking. And so we would become their enemy, even though they're not our enemies, in just wanting to evolve these, you know, AIs. So again, you know, who's really the intelligent designer there? So So
Well,
I would hope that if we
great.
become their enemies, they would decide to kind of move on and not necessarily.
And I think
So
that
the
depends on
fears
us.
are
Yeah.
the fears are often born of our own paranoias and again misunderstanding of how intelligence would think, because even scientists that are experts at evaluating the intelligence of other species, I read their articles and they're always comparing the intelligence to ours, and they're so wrong about what ours is that it makes them incredibly wrong about the intelligence of
Oh yeah.
other.
And Dennett would agree with that. He says that all of the concepts of intelligence we use are full of bias. So
Well,
that's
he called chimpanzees three trick monkeys are chimpanzees. So, and I don't agree
yeah.
with that, because
Well,
if over a long period of time you can live in harmony in a community with more collaboration than we do, I'm pretty sure we've got a lot to learn from them, even though they don't drive cars, or wear ties that most people don't know how to do a good tie.
yeah.
So again, how do we evaluate intelligence? And if it
That's a
is
big
to the greater whole,
yes.
if
That's a lot.
intelligence is not related to an individual life, but ecocentric first, the greater whole that we are a part, then I would say chimpanzees might not have the potential to grow the greater whole, but they also have less potential to destroy it. And we actually have been causing more destruction of the greater whole and not, speeding up or contributing to an evolving evolution,
Well, maybe
or even taking
yeah.
advantage of controlling or managing our own cultures in a collaborative global way. Nobody's ever come close to this, and it's not the League of Nations, United Nations, or anything else.
Well, let's go into that, because that's where I will argue that we've done both. That
Well,
we've
if you argue
become
too much, I'm going to hang up.
yeah. So I guess that the point that I would argue here is that we have become smarter, a lot smarter, and we've become dumber, a lot dumber, all at once.
Now,
So
when you say we, you have to define we,
yes,
because people
humanity.
do not differentiate between themselves, their lives, and the species or even the community. They think, I drive a car, but you can't build a car, you can't fix a flat tire, you can't explain in your kid's class how an internal combustion engine works. So separate that, separate
When I say
and
we,
take charge. Yeah.
I mean the
Yeah.
human species, the entire human
Okay.
species as a whole. But we'll get to that. Because you raised the question of the hard truth and speaking the hard truth. And well, that's an interesting hard or soft, but let's say the truth or the as accurately as possible, right? So what is the human condition today? So I'm raising that up as a question because that's also one of the landmarks that have sort of come up here in the conversation already, this question. And here I have
Now,
noticed, yeah.
I wasn't sure if you were asking. Okay,
Yeah.
you're answering. Go ahead. Yeah.
Here I have noticed that often when this is talked about, people tend to go into the role of the optimist or pessimist. And sometimes pessimists like to call themselves realists, of course, but I guess the point I'm getting to is that I wonder if that is a blind alley somehow, and that it doesn't even make sense to be optimistic or pessimistic. It doesn't even make sense to say that we have evolved or devolved, because it is not yet decided what will happen. So we are at the moment at a point where perhaps we are smarter than we've ever been, more beautiful than we've ever been, more harmonious than we've ever been, and more in harmony with nature than we've ever been. This is not far away, in a similar way as all kinds of versions of destructions is not far away. So since it hasn't been decided, I find this whole point of view to be almost completely meaningless and not helpful to say, oh, it's going the right way, oh, it's going the wrong way, everything's going to hell, everything's swimming along. Because in a sense, if you say that everything's going fine and dandy, you don't have to make an effort. And if you think that everything's going to hell no matter what, you don't have to make an effort. So I'm wondering if that in itself is an example of a kind of parasitic mean that makes us more passive, which might have to do with trauma. It might be a self-protective mechanism, but it does seem to be malfunctioning. We agree on that. And another thing we clearly agree on is that it's not climate change that is the big threat today. It is the climate of the mind and the future of the mind, because everything is dependent on that. And this is why the human operating system, as you call it, is really of tremendous importance. And this is where this conversation comes in as well, because this conversation is in itself an active attempt to upgrade the human operating system. And
Hey, Glenn, that was super nicely put.
yeah,
You summarized a lot of important things we wanted to talk about.
exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I will disagree with you on one thing. I agree with you that labels are risky, pessimist or optimist, and I agree with you as well that when somebody goes one way or the other, it's often they haven't done their psychohistorical work. They haven't reviewed their life and how their life has shaped their worldviews. Now, worldviews, as I was doing research in a master's degree about, is I learned that they're usually formed, by late adolescence. They're pretty formed. After that, you can change them, but it's hard to change them. And it's one of the things I admire about you, because I can see that you have bypassed that ability to be stuck with, the typical patterns we've observed of psychological development. You are capable of readjusting your worldview at an early age, at a later age, like we are.
I think all humans are.
Well, that's the part I'll disagree a little bit with you, because I don't think that we are at the best we've been. I think we are at the part where we have the most potential to become.
Yes.
And again, we're going back to which road are we going to take? And again, I mentioned this in one of my written blogs, is one of the most philosophical and biggest ideas I read was in a Fantastic Four Marvel comic book story, where I'm not sure if that's where the author was heading, but at the end or near the end, evolution is key. And for me, how the ideas I had at the time merge with that sentence is that when intelligence reaches a point that it can manage its own evolution, then you've got the beginning of what could be, at least to lower life forms, even on another planet, a godlike being, or an advanced being. So we are at that stage where the potential is possible. But again, I'm noticing that we are not heading in the right direction. And I've even noticed that in interactions with the entire global system, into consideration, not just us isolating where we can just do a 180, is how we have impacted the system, which is older than us. It will respond to us in a way that even if we had been 50 years ago ready to apply our humanics, technology, or whatever plan would have been to take charge of our own evolution as a species globally, it would have been borderline too late 50 years ago. And now I believe it is too late. And that's sad. Now, again, I realize that growing up in a neighborhood with bullies and in a community with bullies is, and I'm glad there's people that say that. And we have, again, that would be maybe another discussion, but we have different reasons to believe too late or not too late. Now, when I say it's too late, now people might imagine particular scenarios that they can't go there. And I'm not even suggesting those negative scenarios in my head. So again, they have to ask, what do you mean? Like, what are you saying? Should we all give up? And that's the fear. But the thing is you're proving to me by not asking me questions about what I mean. And when I call myself a doctor of humanics and I have people with PhDs ask me what it is, well, it's a 4-part answer. And none of them have ever lasted long enough to listen to the first part. So again, this is evidence to me that, some of our most educated people are incapable of actually reaching a human operating system because there's a lot of infection up there. And part of it is personality, right? Feelings, you know.
Okay,
And
but
Daniel, I'd love to study his life, just like we can study other scientists' lives and see how their science went a particular way, their worldviews, their opinions, their
yeah,
priorities, and
because
their answers to questions go a separate way based on their own patterns of life,
yeah,
right? And
'cause
how they've analyzed it.
he has kind of evolved. Uh, but how can we ever say that someone is incapable? I'll give you an example. I
But it's
was
not
talking,
incapable, it's choices. But
yeah,
when you've studied a person and you believe that they're capable of the choice, but it's highly unlikely that they will make a series of choices to program their brains in a different way, then that matters. That counts for
yeah.
something. And
But
I've studied this.
what if it is wrong that it is highly unlikely? What if the correct answer is that it is possible and it could
It
happen
is
quickly?
possible, but highly unlikely that we could actually take charge. You know, for me, I used to think that possibly if there was a purpose for evolution to have created Homo sapien brains, then it would have been to help create a collective global mind for the sake of possibly having the planet reproduce its essence on other worlds. That's
Yeah,
what I think. It's pretty far out, and people don't want to hear this far out stuff. But if people ask me the question, that's my answer. What do you think?
some
If there
some
was
want
a
to hear.
purpose, this would be it, right?
Some
Now,
want to
if it
hear.
is, we are failing miserably, and science and evolution does fail. It tries things and it doesn't work, or it adapts. But the thing is, I think it will adapt with our biological mass in a way to clean up the plastic, with different bacteria in our gut. It'll be adapting the brain to be evolving in certain ways to have some people still able to decommission nuclear power plants. And I'm not saying that I don't believe that it's good for humans to have nuclear power plants. Is I don't believe it is good when humans suffer from HSD and can't even come close to admitting it to have nuclear power plants, because it's pretty scary. It's like, hey, there's a bully in the neighborhood. We'll give him a gun so he can teach him how not to kill people with the gun. It's not a good idea, He
Yeah,
needs to
yeah.
kind of do the work to not be a bully anymore, right?
And
So
that's what you mentioned with conditioning, which I guess relates a little to the
it's
Dennett
still
studies.
possible, but I mean,
Uh,
then we'd be a stupid designer, right?
but
We'd be making bad choices to
okay,
manage our own evolution.
well, I really want to follow that point because I'll tell you a little story, and I think it exemplifies
I
this.
was told there'd be no stories during our discussion.
I forgot to tell you that there might be room for stories too. It's a short one.
I'm
I was
listening.
I was sitting beside my brother in the car, and he was in a bad mood. Like you could just see it. He was in a really fucking crappy mood. And suddenly this idea came to my mind. I wonder if it's theoretically possible for me now to tell a joke which will actually make him laugh. And the first thought that came to me was not very likely. That will not happen. And for whatever reason, a joke came upon my mind at that moment. So I told him the joke. And it went a couple of moments, and suddenly he began laughing. And he began laughing really well, because for whatever reason, he responded to that joke. And for whatever reason, the entire mindset was switched at one moment in an unexpected direction which seemed completely unlikely. So I guess the thing I'm getting to is it doesn't seem that we're in a position to even evaluate the likelihood. I don't. I guess the likelihood isn't even. I don't know if I would call it meaningless, but it's certainly not clearly understood what it would actually mean.
Well, if
And
we're talking about a probability or a likelihood, I think people would have different answers, and as long as their answers are not 0 or 100,
yes,
then they're providing information to the best of their knowledge.
Yes.
And if
Well,
people have studied this or they've dedicated a part of their life to this, I think it's worth hearing it. But again, to understand where they're coming from, were they in the bad mood all of their life, then, it had an impact on their science, and because humans are not as objective as they think they are, even
oh yeah,
Nobel Prize.
totally.
So I,
Yeah.
so
We
I
are.
like your story, and I was worried, what if he lands on the wrong joke? But you landed on the right joke, and you had the right connection with your brother. And also, one thing I would do is point out the metapsychology after, like saying, oh, I was worried, if I could make it worse, you're actually driving right now, it's risky. And explain to him, because that's a teaching process of your thoughts to his thoughts, to then everybody's thoughts grow, right? Where it went, how the decision was made, what the probabilities were, what the risks were, and even what your motivation was, which I don't know, it could have been mainly, I want to survive this car ride, or it could have been, I care about my brother, or I just want to, show him the glass is half full instead of half. Whatever it was, is there was a risk, and a lot of the risk depended on you having the patience. That means you not being panicking in a car ride if it looked dangerous, to finding the right moment and the right opportunity, and trusting your mind to pop up with this joke, and caring enough that you would make that choice and it would come to mind. And you had all the combination of those things. And it could have been also that your part was exactly the same, and his part could have ended up switching a different switch, right? A neuron switching directions one place, and that's it. It's a different response. But
Okay.
even then, what people don't understand is, then that's fine, because you still can make another million decisions in that same day to really re-guide. Like I was telling one of my students who was afraid to choose the wrong program at university, I was giving her alternative choices that are smaller choices, like, for example, starting general or starting part-time or traveling first or whatever. But again, I said, what if you choose the wrong choice? What is the wrong choice? What if the wrong choice is the only way that you'll eventually be led to the right choice that changes your life? And you had to learn what you hated, or learn who you were from this program. And you probably did a lot of this learning too. I also
Oh
jumped
yeah.
from program to program at school and jobs, and learned many different skills, but also learned I don't want to participate in this crazy paradigm. And I have my own standards, and I won't lose them for a paycheck, even if I want to pay for my first car as a teenager. I knew I had those thoughts back then, right? And I knew what made me sick or depressed were making choices that didn't align with my own values or principles or standards.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so
Well,
the thinking of things again is again, there's no right or wrong. There's just the realization that as long as we're alive, we still have billions of decisions that we can make to change directions anytime.
exactly. That's where I'm getting to too. That it seems to be the case that at any time we, I mean human beings, have this ability to go in any direction.
Now you're talking about individuals again. Now, if we look at the species, and we can say, well, this number of this percentage, let's say, I have these blogs I do where I say the 9 out of 10 nice people in society are the problem. And they want to blame this politician or this thing that happened or this, and it's really them that choose intellectual laziness, and choose a lack of accountability, and choose not to manage their lives and teach that to their kids by role modeling, by saying do what I say, not what I do. Well, that's not parenting. That's child abuse is what it is. So for me, it's like it's funny. Dennett, after he did the joke about saying the word like a lot in a sentence,
Yeah.
and then he got somebody asking questions like this, and I was looking at the guy's face, and is he going to interrupt himself by saying, I'm doing the like now? And it would have been funny, but I think maybe looking at his face, if he thought that, he might have thought, I'm having a hard time focusing my question. I might lose track even more if I make this joke,
Yeah.
which would be cool. And I would do this joke. I love making fun of myself. But anyways,
Yeah, you mean the guy in the audience later? Because he said
and
like
it's a way to sympathize with the audience, right? It's a way to say, I'm human like you, and I'm freaking out, but I'm so glad I came up here to this microphone. This question is important to me. And
Yeah.
one guy actually asked the second question. It was very short, the question period. And I remember I was at a conference called Imagine No Religion 4 in Kamloops, and it was awesome. And I want to video my questions, because in my questions, they're really smart, but they challenged the speaker on a particular worldview, hint to their talk, or a particular contradiction, or just a slightly different way to see things that might be more helpful. And most of them had, because they have the power, everybody loves them, they're so happy. A lot of them slightly bullied me with this question. And again, it tells me, science isn't progressing that great. And I'd love to get a copy of this, because their talks were awesome. But
That's
I had some very good questions that nobody would dare to ask. And it would be just a challenge a little bit. But it would be that if the challenge is met with an open-mindedness, not only the speaker, but the entire audience would grow so much more from this thought.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Can I just throw in a little something there, because I think it's so interesting what you say. Because
Like a badminton throw, like
yeah,
a baseball throw, a football, or I didn't know there'd be sports in the
in
game.
general, when I watch these videos, this one included, yeah, it's as you say, the questioning period is too short, and but at the same time, my impression is that the questions that are asked are often really good ones. Some places more than others, but the people who have showed up for these events and they're physically in the room and they've listened to a lecture, they often have some really interesting questions. And an easy way it could be improved, this process, is just to expand that period a lot and to allow for more interactive exchanges between the speaker and the audience. And that could really take it to a new level.
I would say a ratio would be like a good talk can be done maximum 50 minutes and 40 minutes of questions. And like I believe you are, people that do show up for these things. I remember I went to see David Suzuki in Ottawa, invited by a Council of Canadians in the early 90s, and the talk was great. And I had a chance to shake his hand at the end. And I remember I was influenced by his talk, but I can't remember how. Maybe it'll come back to me at some point. And but I also have heard that, you know, in the background he swears a lot, he's angry. And how could people not? How could Noam Chomsky or David Suzuki devote their entire lives, even have their daughter go to the United Nations, and see less progress and more going towards the, you know, the destructive means, and after investing so much, you know, of your life and your family's life in trying to educate people to kind of start making better decisions. So I agree with you, and I wondered how many people might have had questions I would have loved to hear. And this is again also analyzing the mind of the speaker and how he responds to these questions, and then linking how his worldview was formed and how his various ideas connect together instead of just on the one specific topic that he talked about. So
Yeah.
So now I'm thinking, Glenn, at some point in our part 2 or part 3, we should be live and have a few questions come in.
Yeah, we can definitely do that a little later. But just before we go on, I really would love to not lose this really essential point that we were on, concerning what you really know about what is possible. And as particularly here, the context is the evolution of our mind. And as we both agree, it is the evolution of the human mind. Operating system psychology is tremendously important. This is where the big risks are. All risks are related to this, and that we do have many conditioned ideas that pacify us, that make us uh, not be close to our potential, that there are big risks with that, yet there are big possibilities. Yes, we've all covered that.
Well, if we want to influence, Glenn, particular individuals to make progress with this, I think we should mention they should look at the Johari window. I enjoyed listening to the 4 Agreements on CD, you know, the book on CD a few times. And it makes me think about how my brain's programmed, what it knows, what it doesn't know, you know, like all these things I think are important. And then, you know, when more people kind of actually get out of the intellectual laziness and explore their metapsychology this way, then we can always reevaluate the potential ratio of us, you know, being more successful or heading in different directions in our tipping points of whatever, either our minds or climate change. Because climate change applying the wrong solutions in an aggressive way when we don't know enough about the planet is pretty
Oh
dangerous.
yeah,
So we have
yeah,
to find out why we don't know enough about the planet. We have
yeah,
to be honest with ourselves about how we've wasted, hundreds of years with the wrong priorities in
yeah.
our study or in
And
our
we
technology, right?
and we need to be able to act intelligently under complexity and
We
uncertainty.
need to apologize to the planet. Like
That
90% of the world, including the Pope, has to apologize to the planet on their knees, and say,
oh yeah,
holy schnut, I think this is really where it lies. It's a tipping point of the mind, and the various religions or the various economic paradigms, whatever you want to call them, they're all pretty much the same. And listening to political parties in Canada or other countries is they're all pretty much operating with the wrong paradigm. They're all the same. Like to an atheist, every religion is talking the same thing. And to somebody outside of the monetary or political paradigm is they're all saying the same thing. They could interchange different parties. They could interchange. People wouldn't even notice. They have the same silly priorities that are about to crash as they try to maintain their status quo. They're not evolving. They're not problem solvers in cultural evolution. They're bankers, right? They're
oh,
trying to maintain the elitist status quo. So
okay.
it's sad.
Okay, I have a question for you. Would you agree that most people, including official representatives of organizations, externally support the idea of learning, while the criticism is often that they don't really practice it? Certainly not as much as they say they want to.
Are you asking me if people are pro-education of their
Pro,
lives,
yeah,
or species or kids or?
humans in general, would you agree that humans in general respect knowledge and truth and learning very highly, I would actually say?
I'm not. I would say that if we're answering with all the people in the world, in every country or in every socio-economic demographics or status level, because even this country here, they still have status levels in their society, is I believe that more than 9%, more than 9 out of 10 do not. They might say it, but it's not the theory that counts, it's the behavior that counts,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So
This is
based
where I'm
on
getting
their
to.
behavior, it is not an inherent value, because then it would be shown in their behavior.
Wait,
So I'm
okay,
afraid it isn't, which tells me again the potential is not going to be what the hopeful
okay.
people say. Now, I
Let's
wait,
not lose
wait,
that.
Glenn.
Wait,
I just
yeah,
want to get back to how you said that joke. It worked with your brother. Now, I don't hear Greta say a lot of jokes, and it works for her in the forums where she is. But I still believe that most people listening to her and maybe crying a few tears and saying she's right, what the next day, again, HSD explains this illness, they're back to business as usual. And
hmm.
that's what needs to be addressed. Why
Oh yeah, yeah.
did Severn Suzuki and Greta, why? Because I'm pretty sure that Greta is doing great work and we need her, and she'll go down in history as, in great ways, I hope, if they don't discredit her in the future in some ways that are silly, because they're trying to say, they might at some point when she gains more voice, they might try to discredit her because of some diagnosis she's admitted to. Now, I agree for her to admit to these things, which may or may not be right, and which may or may not be challenges instead of advantages for a person. But I think Asperger's is one where recently there's somebody that's an admin of a Facebook group that believes I have Asperger's because I'm not conforming to get a job like them, and
Hmm.
so, but again, I think a lot of it now is if somebody's really honest and they really want to practice honest ethics, is I think you can automatically get an Asperger's diagnosis now
Yeah,
when the truth comes to you naturally, right? When it's a diagnosis maybe where you can't put a mask on and it just
yeah.
doesn't.
Well, in Silicon Valley, being an Asperger is considered a competitive advantage in some circles. or programmers.
The brain is programmed in different ways for what psychiatrists and writers of the DSM-5, the poor fools that they are, that have no clue about the human mind really is.
So,
and I don't mind if they challenge me on that.
So
They will diagnose things as disabilities, and there's so many things that are out of the norm. They're actually advantages, and that we could learn from these people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a whole big topic, and you're totally right. It's just I also want to not lose that point you mentioned, which was that they say that they're pro-learning, but their behavior indicates otherwise. That's what you said. So, and that was my question was that would you agree that humans, when they speak, especially when they speak publicly, we express a great respect for knowledge, for truth, and for the ability to learn and not be stuck in our stupid ways, but be able to improve over time. And that the problem seems to be that it's difficult for us to actually do this for whatever reason. That we tend to be stuck very often in patterns that we actually don't want to be stuck in. We say we don't want it, and I believe we actually do not want to be stuck. But for whatever reason, we easily get stuck in a certain pattern. Is that really the issue here? That the difficulty for us to act out what we really want to act out, to actually live by our soul's principles.
It'll be a long answer if you permit it. Daniel at some point said, for people to create certain machines to be morally responsible. Well, it's a good idea, except that most societies, if not all, have already grown too far out of the accountability paradigm with their own legal system. So it doesn't make a difference, right? It's a nice idea to think somebody will be held accountable, but it's no longer the dominant paradigms. And unfortunately, the image of who somebody is. People are so domesticated now that they don't even want to challenge each other on their fake images of who they are. So they can stay intellectually lazy. They can just say, I enjoy the arts and culture and blah, blah, blah. And because they're so afraid to be challenging each other that they'll just accept everybody else, and they will see me as one nasty black sheep if I enter that community. And it doesn't take long. If I'm honest and I'm consistent, it takes just a couple of going to one of their meetings to know that, okay, the friendliness from the first meeting already at the beginning of the second meeting is starting to be noticeably going away. And it's because I'm starting to have them look at themselves in the mirror, and they don't like seeing it, because I'm consistent, they can see, and I can prove what I say, with my role modeling. So if somebody says, oh yeah, I'm like this and I value this, then I will be in, and I do this with parents sometimes, that I know aren't doing a great job with their kids, is I'll say, well, have you thought maybe of doing this or this instead? Or if you believe this, wouldn't your choices be this? And then often they'll say, you don't understand, I have a mortgage to pay, I got to drive the kids to soccer. So the you don't understand is that they're putting their own guilt about their choices on me as the bad guy, because I've become a mirror to them, because I know how to ask the right question to say, well, wait, if you value this and I want to believe you, then you are aware that this could have been one of your choices as well. And then it eventually gets to the point, oh, I got to sit down now or whatever. And so it's quite sad. Yeah. And there's so much. Yeah, but is it criticism? Because I just want to say, don't give me bullshit, really. And if you've watched my 2 videos that I've put on the ecology of systems thinking site, is I put a 2-part of incongruence, and incongruence is so important. It's one of the various foundations of the concept of accountability, and accountability is at the basis of a civilization. And we've never achieved civilization in the history of the Homo communius as a species, as people as a species. So we've only crashed proto-civilizations. And if we don't start by admitting this, and we want to believe we're at a certain level to use our brain potential that we're not even close to it, because we're too intellectually lazy and we're selling each other our images, our fake images,
Hmm.
then what do you think the success rate is going to be? And that's where I get,
Because we got self-limiting, mechanisms that are holding our brains in prison.
We have what?
Self-limiting ideas that hold our minds in prison. That seems to be one of the problems.
Well, again, the ideas are choices, and if somebody thinks that their personalities, they were born with it or whatever, they could change their personality. They can change this was supposed to be our topic. It was supposed to be nature and nurture, but the talk wasn't that much about that. But if a child is born in a place where barely any kids survive because there's bombs falling from the sky, or there's horrible crimes against children, is the child could still, and part of it might be random, make a decision to grab their sibling and walk away and end up surviving, maybe writing a book or winning a Nobel Prize. But there's a series of billions of choices that were made, and that person started controlling their own personal evolution by changing their environment, their nurture. They might have been born with genetics with a particular predisposition, but I believe that that is not as powerful as our power of choice to control the environments that we will be picking up our role modeling from. And again, when I've talked to people in Canada about immigration, I say, well, I love immigrants as long as they bring what's best in their country and leave the bad. And when they come to Canada, please don't pick up all our bad and just pick up our good. And that's the way, again, it's a particular idea to evolve cultures, but no politicians talking about this, because you're going to break everybody's image of who we are as a society or culture or our party or our people or
exactly. But the point is that if you speak to any human that I met, and I have a little time to speak with, the intelligence level of the conversation is about 100 times higher than anything seen on TV after just a few minutes. So the politicians, their conversations are not real conversations. They're not even remotely close to real conversations. And that's one of the big obstacles.
But how many people watching the politicians on TV know this and will say this honestly? And the percentage is incredibly low. And again, that's a sign.
I don't know. Quite a few. I often hear it. I think
but then it'll be different levels. It'll be criticizing politicians for things that shows they're not that bright. But if I, like just the Senate or something in Canada, Parliament, I'd be recording and narrating it later. I'd be saying it in a way that they would feel so offended that, the RCMP would come talk to me. But again, it is actually what they said and how somebody that thinks differently, but not trying to be insulting, is reflecting it back at them. And it doesn't show a human operating system. It's so far from it. And then I could say, well, the examples of how a different conversation would have gone or a different response could have gone. And when you do this and those were possible responses, and yes, we did not do it, then you kind of prove to them again, and then you become quite a villain that I don't want to go back.
Exactly, but a lot of this happens on Twitter. Would you even say that what is happening on Twitter is a conversation?
I don't have Twitter. I don't have a lot of the other things because it's been almost 2 years now that I gave up a cell phone, and that's a longer answer on why. And so I don't know, but I could pretty much tell you that we're not improving our abilities to communicate with each other as a species with things like cell phones or Twitter or even Facebook.
But that's because of how we're using them. That's
the way
we're using them now.
We want to blame.
We don't have to use them like that.
We create these cultures. I mean, you can't say you can't put the whole blame on people that create Facebook. I mean, it's the things we do with it or don't do with it.
I'm not blaming that.
It's the messages we spread on that make the difference, right?
But I'm just trying to describe a dynamic that I see. The dynamic that I see is that the public political conversation doesn't even exist. There is no public political conversation today in the big public. On certain podcasts, in certain subcultures, there's a real conversation. On the big public channel, there is a kind of theater which has nothing to do with a real conversation. And on Twitter also, there's interactions where people are arguing against images that don't even exist, and they're arguing against opinions that don't exist, and they don't know the person they're talking with, and they don't know what they mean by their words, and they never actually get around to understanding what the words mean at all, the signals mean at all. So to just sum all of this up very shortly, there is no communication on a large part of these networks. That doesn't mean it has to be like that. That could change. But a large part of the time, those interactions are something that I would not consider even remotely close to real community.
Which again, for me, Glenn, is telling me there's a devolution going on. And it's because a lot of cultures, even if they have just one language as a primary language in their country, they're using less and less words, less and less efficiently. At the beginning, I was praising you that you were, before the recording, that you were saying we should ask clarifying questions. Good. Now, when I ask people, even people with a suit, they're millionaires, they got PhDs, they're in positions of power. If I ask them, do you know what I mean by saying this word or this statement? Is they will make me to be the bad guy that they have to paraphrase me. Now, paraphrase is an important part of continuing a conversation on the same subject, right? So I'm the bad guy for expecting this from elite people. So, and people that others want to become like or look up to and allow to make decisions. And when it comes to democracy, well, if you define it properly, there isn't a country in the world that is even coming close to applying the concept properly. And even if they were, it's still not the best that a culture of advanced thinkers can come up with, right? It's not the most efficient. So again, that we are there after so long that a civilization or a country like China that calls itself a civilization for 5,000 years has made so little progress has to be explained. It has to be explained how after this time when Daniel says, oh yeah, and then once this happened, oh wow, now there's bridges and spaceships and yeah, but how do you explain the rest without being in denial? Because what happened that we did only this and only a few of us can actually understand or do something?
Well, would you agree that clearly there's been made enormous progress while also being devolution? Well, I thought it's totally right. Obviously, we're nowhere close to where we could be, but I can have water coming out of the tap. And the fact that there's water coming out of the tap.
Well, then we're talking about standards. We're talking about standards. And we can just stick to water for standards to see how we're going to be facing a serious water problem in the future. So how are we in denial that, oh, we've made so much progress, now you don't have to walk
Well, we made progress on that. We've solved it essentially in theory. Graphene filters, life straws. The technology has been developed for very economic water filtering. And we have...
Okay, what about distribution? We don't have fair distribution for food. Do you think we'll have it for those straws? So again, it's what is wrong with us that we say we care about others. I care about these kids. And yet we don't want to know if we bought a piece of clothing where kids are being, abused in another country to make this
clothes. We have abundance of water. We have abundance of water. We actually have abundance. We actually have an abundance of water.
I believe the water is not going to reach the right people enough in the right way in the near future, and it's not going to be healthy water, and whatever technology might be come up with, again, it's going to be the elite or the minority that will benefit.
Okay, if you predict that, I'll say it's a possible future, but that's a very stupid future. That's incredibly stupid. We should aim definitely for clean water for every single person in the world.
Well, it's stupid in the sense that most people understand the importance of water.
Yeah,
but what some people might not even admit to themselves is it's not stupid because I matter and you don't. Some people think this. Some people think it's normal for, let's say, a potential of half the population dying in like 30 years or so. They would think it's normal. It's just survival of the fittest, because we still think in this way that makes us inhumane. with each
Well,
other.
then, yes, they are still in what is called a scarcity mindset. They have,
Yeah.
they still are in the mindset where they think that we humans are these corrupted creatures or something like that. It's got something to do with that. I am arguing it doesn't have to be that way, and we can easily provide clean water for every person in the world. If there's one thing there is enough of on this planet, it is water. There is so
Okay.
much water. It is
And you're talking about using salt water in a way as well, right? Now,
yes, of course.
Glenn, we also have to address the issue of there might be enough now, but we can't keep growing our numbers because, again, you know, other species depend on water. If we keep consuming it, that we actually have to, you know, go mine it on asteroids, then we are addicts, right? We don't have the ability to manage our own cultural evolution.
Yeah, and
So
this is
for me, I'm very happy with space, you know, technology going to mine stuff. But again, if it's for economic consumption and being, you know, over consumers of the entire freaking universe, Isaac Asimov did
yeah, yeah,
some
yeah.
predictions one
I
time.
know that. But I'm just saying that if our minds become just to a certain stage, we won't even consider it in that way anymore. So this has to do with the evolution of our minds, and if we actually understand that we can have an abundance of clean water, good food, all the required energy, all the required tools for certainly 7 billion people, certainly
Okay,
even 20 billion people easily within
yeah.
a short time. And if we then, as you mentioned earlier, become conscious authors of our own evolution, then we can solve all this. But we have to begin with ourselves, as you say. It's a psychological issue at the core, which prevents
We have to
us.
ask ourselves why we don't care enough when we see on the news that there are kids or even if not kids or adults or animals that are not getting their basic needs met.
I
And
know.
because we don't care enough about that, we are divided. Now, as a divided species with this much, you know, technological power with weapons and pollution and toxins that have been created that are so bad, then it's pretty scary. Like, even if you apply these solutions where everybody gets fed, if you didn't solve this, you're just, you know, you're just putting a band-aid on a broken arm. And also,
Oh,
once it's solved, there should already have been a plan when everybody's, you know, basic needs are met. What is the purpose of our species? Is it to advance science? Is it, or do we want to aspire to become like in Star Trek? And is it just about eating? And then when there's actually food of lower nutritional quality as well, then you're looking at, you know, so how will we solve these problems? With a priority of quality in the long term, or just everybody having bread on their table? Bread is, you know, eventually we're not going to evolve. We
no.
evolved more through rich seafoods in
Yes.
the past, right? Are these
A rich
grains?
diet.
So
A
yeah.
rich diet. Well, to that thing you say, well, why don't we care more? I can certainly say that I care, and that even though so far it's maybe not the actions which have been managing to solve it, but I care. Every single person I talk to cares, and we we are not happy about others suffering unnecessarily. The
If
problem
you
seems
believe,
to be
Glenn,
people believe it's impossible to change. That's the problem. People believe that we're stuck with it, that we have to make a crappy sucker's choice between two bad
that's
options.
intellectual laziness. We are
Yes,
capable of
do
change.
it.
If we just
Yes,
need to push through our intellectual laziness and
yes,
do the psychohistorical work as individuals and as our species from
yes.
our origins. That's what needs to be done.
That's what
But
needs
for
to go.
this, there needs to be collective learning. We've
Oh, yes,
lost this as a species. And
exactly.
there needs to
Well,
be schools that promote this. And we've lost this globally as a species.
I don't know if we
So
lost it. Have we really? I don't know if we totally lost it. I think we have it in many subcircles. and we have
Yeah,
it in
but again,
specialized
it
test
has to be a majority, Glenn. It
I
can't
know,
be
I know.
there's one good school here and there, and the rests are winning. They're going to become, domestication centers.
But
And if everybody Glenn, cares based on their actions, then you are living in paradise. I'm coming to you. It's a utopia. You do
well,
not suffer from species alienation at all. If everybody around you acts like they care and they're intelligent, that's where I want to be.
well, I gotta
I'm
say,
booking a plane ticket.
The Norwegian culture is a relatively uh, functioning culture, comparatively speaking. I would say that, and there's some good things, but there's also weaknesses that you see are better in other cultures. But when I say that they care, I mean those that I've met, that I've spoken with, that I get to know a little bit better. As I learn about them, I soon understand that this person is far more intelligent than I ever thought, far more caring than I ever thought, far more interesting than I ever thought, far more full of paradoxes than I ever thought. And the image that I used to have of that person is just a complete joke, because in reality, that person's whole world of life, which strictly speaking, recreates itself every moment. So every moment, the person is really something that they've never even existed before. And in that sense, we are truly unique at every moment.
I
And
believe this too. And this is why, Glenn, when I first interact with somebody, they're getting the doctor of humanics. They're getting a collaborator, somebody who wants to expand their mind with them. And when I get a personality, which is a great impactor of learning, that is confrontational and argumentative and wrong about it. And again, that's my opinion. But then I become the captain of accountability and I bounce back their image at themselves. And then, not getting a job there, or I'm not getting a friendship there, or I'm not going to get my social needs met there. But I had to do this. I had to stick to what I believe is the real situation of our interactions. Now,
does it work though?
And when it comes to Norway, I was there and I just received in the mail recently, finally, an audio recording of myself talking to the UDI for over an hour and describing myself wanting to give back to Norway and live there and contribute to the society with all the skills I have. And they did not want to set a precedence, so they paid thousands of dollars to send me back to Canada. And they made a choice for me. They violated my human right. I just said, tell me which categories I have to stay here. You're the immigration department, right? And they chose for me that I chose a category where there's usually an answer of a refused, and then there's an appeal. But the appeal is like it's nothing. It's like a lawyer that works for them that sends a generic email that's badly written, and then they tell you lost your appeal. It's so dysfunctional. For me, I don't consider this a civilization. For me, this is enough. If I define civilization properly, I don't consider that Norway as either. And again, you live in a particular community. I'm evaluating it in the national scale based on a particular government's culture to have interacted with me honestly as who I am, but also a unique case study is they have failed to prove that they can even achieve a proto-civilization. Now, for me, this is tough. Like, I know I have pain that comes with this realization. I would like to say, oh, no, I should just try again. Now, a lot of the immigration police in Norway were wishing for me success. They were cooperative and helpful, but they didn't want to go against, the new government creating these immigration rules and giving them jobs and building new centers for immigrants to come to. And so for me, it's like, if they disagree, and they're police officers, and police officers should be role models, and they facilitate the status quo, they're the 9 out of 10 nice people in society that are part of the problem, then yeah, it's hard to respect them, even though they were fairly nice to me. Because, I'm worried they have kids. I'm worried that they will become even worse.
But
And
that also, that also depends on the laws in that country.
and it depends on what?
Yes, I was just saying that when they conform to their role, there's
they
the gap.
get the privilege of paying for their car and having soccer for their kids and
so
watching.
There's a certain gap between that role, what is possible for them, and what they maybe want. I'm just mentioning that if the laws are better, are more intelligent, then that at least makes the gap somewhat closer. And the police, for example, in the country I live, have always been very correct and fair. I haven't had much to do with them, but generally I feel that they're doing a very good job most of the time, and they certainly are well-meaning, and they're acting within certain restraints, which, while far from perfect, still do offer a lot of stability compared to, let's say,
Glenn,
yeah.
I agree with you, and I agree that there is more respect over there than the RCMP in Canada, which are dysfunctional and have so much internal struggles people don't know about, where they are, you know, their own worst enemies. So, and it's not going to get better anytime soon. So, again, what if you choose a particular leader of the RCMP to fix the corruption or clean it up or make the culture respectable again? Well, he's the minority. He's one guy. He could be right about everything and be the most honest guy in the world and the most devoted to his job. He's not going to win. He's going up against the majority. Now, the immigration police in Norway were all pretty cool with me, except for one guy on my way out who I turned around and I told him his joke wasn't funny. And, but otherwise, they're all pretty good. And again, how much respect should I give them, and how should I evaluate them? Should I evaluate them based on the norm of their society at the time, or should I evaluate them on a greater right or wrong after they heard my story? After they heard, well, this would be a tough choice, but this would be the right choice to do. Wouldn't you agree? And they would say yes. But you don't understand, right now there's a new government, you know, for immigration. So again, this is the same thing that happened when Germany got worse and worse, is good people didn't stand up for what was right. They allowed things to happen, and a lot of people are actually suffering. And climate change is going to create so much immigration that when we don't, movements, migrations of people and animals, that if we don't understand that our anthropocentric political, economic nonsense of borders is a mental illness that we've been clinging to for hundreds of years, and we want to say, great, we have water, or we have I was in a humanist meeting in Courtney, and they had and I'm giving names. I said this year I'm giving names, okay? I'm not saying this guy's name, but he won medals in the Canadian Army, and he's, you know, curator of the museum in Courtney, I think, or so, Comox, and Lazo. And in a humanist meeting, he was so impressed with how weapons now can minimize innocent casualties, or even casualties of, you know, the enemy party. And he was saying how, this gives him hope for his grandkids. And I said, if you really prioritize, you care about your grandkids' futures, wouldn't you be changing your paradigm to, laying weapons down and not having the deterrent philosophy, which just creates more war and paranoia? And, wouldn't there be, and then I could see his face is like, but he's got the entire audience as these older humanists that are just very impressed. They had him come talk, he's in the same age group. But again, this was a tipping point for his mind to possibly change a worldview for the sake of his grandkids. And supposedly he cares for his grandkids, but again, same old business as usual, where the change is too slow and too late to actually show that we can manage our own cultural evolution. So it's pretty discouraging for me. And again, I'm not saying Canada's the worst country in the world. It's just that I've become very good at studying it and explaining to them how their choices will impact the future. And they still make choices that don't make me think they care about their kids over there.
Yeah. Well, let's go into all that. And it's super interesting. Just to sort of bring the context back, it seems clear from everything we talked about that a major theme here is the human mind, the ways of thinking, the worldviews we operate from, which express themselves in our behaviors and habits, and systems are examples of such habitual forms of existence. I think we seem to see that relatively eye to eye. And we've also covered that the modern so-called democratic societies are, on the one hand, far more functioning than many other societies have been before, clearly, and they have, in some sense, created a lot, and are clearly also incredibly far away from living up to their own ideals, and incredibly far away from the real potential, which is that moment when you see that, oh, this is not even a proto-civilization, like you say, and this is maybe one of those moments when a question I want to throw in is, well, when you have that insight, this isn't even close to what it could be. Isn't the very existence of that insight alone in itself an incredibly promising sign?
An incredible what?
Incredibly promising sign.
Yes,
Just
if the majority were there, if the majority were there, but they're not there.
Wait a minute. Are they not? I'm not so sure. They seem dissatisfied. The majority.
Well, how do you evaluate the majority's behaviors? I mean, I'm sure you have access to more alternative news sources.
Yes.
And if you're just going by your surroundings, again, you're very lucky with your surroundings. But
well, judging from the internet, for certainly, there's an impression that many are dissatisfied with the systems until now. That must imply that they believe that something better is possible, probably something far better. And this again comes back to the main theme, which is evolution, and the argument which I'm strongly making that it is true that something better is possible, that something far better is possible, and because this is true under the conditions we live, this is one of the reasons why we have such strong reactions of anger when we see injustice in the world, and even when we read something stupid posted on the internet. And this does seem to explain, to some extent, even the collapse of conversation on the internet. The fact that there is a sense that we could do better, and we should do better, and we should do better now. So that's one side of the issue. I also wanted to, I just wanted to tell a little story, which I thought was funny, since you mentioned this with weapons that minimize damage. And there's a story which came to my mind once in a vision, which is it's actually a very beautiful story. That might become a movie someday. And it's a story of sometime into the future when all the militaries have been more or less totally replaced by robots, drones. And no human wants to go to war anymore because they don't want to get killed. And then there's two nations that go to war against each other, but it's a pure drone war, so there's no humans involved. It's just robots fighting other robots. And then at that moment, for whatever reason, somebody comes with the idea of organizing this big tent where the people from the different nations, the representatives, are sitting together, and they're having a meal, and they're even having a couple of drinks while watching on the big screen these drones fight it out amongst themselves. And in this story, which is a story from a possible future, this becomes a very beautiful moment when all the people in the tent at that moment suddenly realize the complete absurdity of war in the first place. And when they just see that the final result of it is just that you're sending robots to kill other robots. So why don't we just make the robots, I don't know, build even better robots so that we can all be happy. That is a sort of a thought experiment, but it puts into perspective this development of weapon systems in a somewhat different light. That in a sense, it almost makes it even more apparent just how unnecessary warfare actually is, that there are better options. So,
in a way, you know, the fighting with robots, with the mining involved, the carbon footprint involved, all these things, there might be more people dying from this, you know, and just a waste of resources over the long period too. But the fact that at that point, the humans can build robots, but they're still missing the thinking tools to do conflict resolution and collaborate and realize they're all the same. They should just care as much about somebody else so that equality can grow. And so I thought you were going to say that the robots were evolving thinking tools and they would stop fighting and they would do what the humans never did and teach the humans how to be human, you know?
That would be another one. That should be a movie on its own, actually.
But the fact that we're still fighting because we think you have something we want or you disagree with us in a way that's going to harm us when we're all really the same is still so far from the right paradigm to be successful. Now, you were saying before that you believe better is possible, and of course I do. But that particular philosophy, like that message, I would say would have been needed by most people to say and believe this 150 years ago. Again, I think that about 50 years ago is when we should have already applied the Humanix technology to create a global, functioning, stable civilization. So 150 years ago would have been where we needed to be there, believing in something better, just the belief part as a majority. So that's that. And also the fact that we have so many. Now imagine if we lose 50% of the population overnight, okay? How do we reabsorb and recycle cities? How do we decommission some nuclear power plants? How do we decide which bridge to keep functional and repaint or not? How do we, train people in a different way in universities that have to be totally reinvented for a totally new society? Well, we're not even close to having discussions about this stuff. So how does a society that is so still wanting to be at war with weapons that are more than enough to kill everybody many times, including poisons that were not effectively or efficiently radioactive or whatever, disposing of, and that our numbers are still so big, for me, it's like, again, it tells me we've passed the tipping point as a successful species. And what we have to be working on is the mitigation, less suffering for the future generations. But again, for that, we need grandfathers and grandmothers to sit down with their kids instead of being admired by them, is to apologize and make it up to them until they die, these grandparents. They were part of the problems and so were their parents. And they're training their kids at a younger age with HSD to become part of the problem. And the numbers are growing. And it's so unstable what is going to happen in the future. And again, why do humans learn the hard way? Why do we need catastrophe on a global scale? Why do we need a war to stop wars for a couple of years?
Maybe we don't need it. Maybe we don't. But
we don't, and that's the problem. Why does it act like this? And it calls itself Homo sapiens, and it calls itself sentient. It is not. You're talking about a species. You have to define it as a species, not as the smartest guy you know. That's not the species. Mother Teresa is not the species. So don't define the species based on her life. Define it based on the majority. And then you will start to not just do the metapsychology of your own individual life, but the psychohistory of your own species. And then you have a chance to start using the Humanix technology or thinking tools in a way. So first there has to be admitting that there's a disease that needs to be cured. And then after that, start rebuilding. Because again, just having a number of neurons doesn't make somebody human. Because as opposed to a bear, to become human, we need about 25 years to mature this brain with the right kind of education and the right sequence in the right community with collective learning, which doesn't exist anywhere on Earth anymore.
So if you I'm not so sure about that. Not so sure about that.
Show me, tell me. I'm gonna book a plane ticket very soon. Please tell me and make sure that it's correct, because I don't have a lot of money to buy.
I think it's happening. Collective learning. in the
But it should.
collective unconscious. The collective
But we have
unconscious.
less collective learning now than we did thousands of years ago. And we need
Um,
more now. Collective learning is a cultural tool that should have evolved, and it devolved.
and it's evolved as well. That's the point. I think it's devolved and evolved. The thing is, there's this weird thing that's happened where it's this increasing complexity, this increasing madness and confusion.
And with that
Nonsense.
comes a tendency for intellectual laziness, which is
Yes.
one of our biggest enemies we have
Yes.
to own up to.
Which again is related to information overload, that we want to conserve energy, that it hurts self-protective mechanisms. There's various things into play.
Let's just make babies and hope for the best instead of create humans.
Yes, exactly. But it's just that then the question is, because you mentioned that 50 years ago, we already then had all the tools to create a global happy civilization, take care of all the needs.
When you say we, you might mean it existed.
Yeah, it existed.
But most people didn't know, and if they knew, they weren't applying it.
Yeah.
And there wasn't enough people that were at that stage.
Yes, okay. And so, but somewhere, and I will certainly argue even more today, there are more people that see the need for a global harmony among humans, which there's probably a larger number of people who are interested in this now than ever before. I think that's a safe bet. Maybe that doesn't mean they're talking about it all the time. And maybe it just happens even once in a while. Maybe it's just.
Well, what does that mean? What does that mean, Glenn? If people talk more about the last soccer game on TV than solutions to world problems, what does that mean to you?
It means that we are stuck in a certain pattern that we need to break out of. And that's where I feel that these conversations are a tool to help us break out. And there's other tools, and the fact that podcasts such as the Joe Rogan podcast, where he has conversations lasting often for 2 or 3 hours, has become the #1 podcast on the internet. It has millions of views, and this is a real high quality podcast in my opinion. Sometimes more than others, obviously. And this shows that there really is an interest in people for high quality, genuine conversation about important things where many of these traditional beliefs are being challenged. So what I see is that there's a powerful undercurrent in human culture where there really is an interest in all this. There is.
Yeah, but what if this current is correlated to the hard times people are either aware of or unconsciously picking up? You know, there's hard times, climate change or whatever, or economics or political. What if it's correlated and it's not really choice? It's really just some people respond to an uncertainty about the future in this way to learn more, but not necessarily be proactive. Some people go deeper in their denial. Now, again, as a culture or as a species, we're still, you know, the bad memes are winning, right?
Well, and, I don't know if they're winning. I don't think they're winning. I think they're just competing against each other, and people are looking at it, and it just looks more and more ridiculous, and we're more and more.
Again, Glenn, I could give you scenarios where what it would look like if those memes were winning. Okay, and it's very like my brother once told me, he said, "Oh, you should totally go into politics, and this party would, you know, be more open to you or in your ideas." I said, "You don't know me at all. You know me from 1984. You've never noticed how I've grown since then." And I say, "You don't understand. If I was there, I'd be challenging people on their nonsense so much, and asking people to resign for their nonsense every freaking day. I'd be so out of the norm. And why aren't there more countries that watch how silly the conversations are and go like Iceland has done a few times, I think, and they go and they stand outside and say, you better quit and you better get out because we're pissed off and you're gonna. So this is a type of accountability, and I'm, you know, and I'm not saying it's perfect, or I'm not saying who's right or wrong because I don't have enough of the facts, and sometimes, you know, it's scary extremism, but you need numbers. You don't need extreme behaviors. So if you have, let's say, like people are complaining about Trump, but let's say, you know, they're right. And because again, I'm not sure how United States society is evolving based on Trump. I wrote a time capsule piece that says he was probably the best candidate to have Americans look at themselves in the mirror and decide which side of the fence to fall on, out of a choice of lesser evils. So for me, I think it's still possible that good long-term cultural evolution, but not enough cultural evolution, but more than the other candidates might have created, if you understand socio-cybernetics. Now, let's say there's like a 10,000 people petitioning something he did that is not right. Now, if in that city, there is, let's say, 1.6 million people that live and only 10,000 show up, that says a lot. And if the 10,000 people that show up, they're just, the ones they just need to vent something, they're not necessarily there for the right reasons or the right suggestions, then again, is that a positive sign? Well, out of 1.6 million, let's say there's even a hockey game or soccer tournament that parents and their families and their kids would go out and say, that's not okay. They don't have to go around that particular building. They just go out in the street and you can pick that up on TV satellite. And that's really a movement. That's really a movement that could create a change. And the only time you have these kind of movements is when people have no more food and everybody's getting killed and they have to get out of their country and just migrate somewhere else. Well, they're not trying to change their own country, and they haven't fixed the thinking tools to not recreate these patterns of behavior somewhere else. They're just going out of desperation. So again, it is not planned. It is not planned cultural evolution or management.
Right.
And it is not enough.
That's actually Dennett's point as well, that most of the cultural evolution isn't even conscious. We don't even know it. It just happens by itself.
But it can be partially more conscious.
Yes, and that is what Dennett builds towards. And this is where his whole idea comes into something extremely interesting, in my opinion. And
did you ever notice with Dennett, because you've known him for a long time, let me know if you've noticed this, because I've noticed it with other scientists or Noam Chomsky or David Suzuki, and I haven't particularly studied their life, but I've just noticed a little bit of pattern that when they get older, and when we feel more sense of insecurity with our failing bodies, is the worldview gets a little bit more gentle in the messages, right? Not tough love kind of accountability.
Yeah,
and it's possible that Dennett, at a time where maybe he felt more physically fit to not be in a fisticuff, but more in a heated debate, would have been more tough love that we needed, because Greta is the one doing this right now, and we, and she doesn't have all the world of wisdom so far that Dennett has in his years of, academic research and stuff like this. But yet, for me, she demonstrates various types of important intelligence more than Nobel Prize winners who are just wearing a nice suit and they're articulate and they write their own speeches and they, they have a lot of collaborating scientist network. But still, Greta, when it comes to practical life skills intelligence, has more intelligence than many people that are admired and that are I like Jane Goodall. And unfortunately, I think maybe some of her foundations, have become too big that I've lost quality to actually be more part of the solution than part of the problem. But I would really want Greta to win the Nobel Prize. And if she doesn't, if it's Jane Goodall, then again, we are sending the wrong message to the world for what, and I'm not saying she doesn't deserve recognition for many things, Jane Goodall, but to actually have achieved what Greta has at that young age and to have overcome the challenges she's overcome, instead of often with a lot of these scientists that are older have been at the right place at the right time to grow their scientific career and have the right kind of privilege to go to certain schools. But for her to do this, now that's types of intelligence that we need the majority of people to have. And unfortunately, they don't have it. If we're just like the ecology of systems thinking and we're putting graphs and nobody's going out there and doing stuff.
Well, we got different types of intelligence, different people. And if we
which ones do we need now? Because even if you get 9 out of 10 people understand the theory but not apply the practice, and we're not even close to that, then it's still not success.
I think we need them all. We need all the intelligence of all the people coming together in one harmonious unity to a far larger extent. That's
Well, people have been
interesting.
saying we need this for a long time, and we need this beautiful dream of hope, and you know, and a lot of people have sometimes been killed for saying this with too loud of a voice. But we need, as everybody intuitively all knows this, right?
Yes, I
We
think
don't
so.
need a Jesus character to come back. And when I was homeless in Vancouver, and I offered to go volunteer at a prominent church in Vancouver, I said, "Oh, I'm without a job right now, but I'm homeless with a lot of skills. Can I come volunteer?" And the high priest of that really expensive church that could be housing a whole bunch of homeless people is said, "Just get a job." Pretty much was his answer. And so again, when people, even if there is a Jesus and he came back, Christians wouldn't even recognize him, and they'd be the first to crucify or medicate or put him in jail or diagnose him with something, because they just don't identify with people with the kind of intelligence of applying solutions. Let's say they believe we need this, and this is right and wrong. Well, you need to live, you need to walk the talk. And people that walk the talk make other people who just want to sell their image with their intellectual laziness and sell a dream. Oh, we need this as long as I can make it through my life and I don't see my kids die before me. But if they do, too bad, because I'm not really going to apply solutions. I'm too uncomfortable with that hard work. Thinking tools requires hard
Yeah,
work. And that's, we're not like a bear. It's not, we have a lot more to learn to be humans than just shelter, reproduction, food, and things like that. We have a lot more, and we have that responsibility that everybody's moving away from. So what I wanted to say is I've noticed with HSD that more and more people, parents at a younger age, are picking up victim type personalities, and they're passing it on to their kids. And even childcare workers are passing it on to the kids at such an early age that they're they're losing their ability to understand their own mortality, to manage their life, because they get just one chance at an even younger age. These homo
yes,
communia, the
yes,
common man, woman, child of the day, in every country I'm seeing this.
yes, yes, yes.
Oh, if only you knew the challenges
Okay.
I have right now.
Yes.
I'm just surviving one day at a time. Well,
Well,
you're teaching this to your kids. You're teaching not
yes.
problem solving, but
Victim
victim
mentality. Yeah,
personality.
the victim mentality. So this is, we agree about that, and that's what I've been talking about too. Now here's a question: why is victim mentality in itself a meme? When I say that word, many people know what I mean immediately. Well, that's interesting.
The
What?
word
Why?
meme?
No, I mean the word victim mentality as an expression. This has
Why
become,
do so many people know what it means?
yes,
And
that's an
that's one way
interesting
to
question.
know how much something is spreading, right? and
Yes.
and they and they, if you have a good connection with them, they might admit to being a little bit like that themselves. But when you start bringing the attention, that you notice your kid is starting to act like this, oh, you're not going to
Okay.
be invited for dinner so much anymore.
I got a pretty good specific example. Let's say that you were just put into a room with an average human.
Is
It
your
could,
brother there in a really bad mood? Because I already
no,
have a joke ready. Yeah.
no, unfortunately not. But if you were put into a room with an average person, and it was conditions which were beneficial, that means that it was a sort of a friendly atmosphere. You could be open, you could speak openly. It wasn't any rush, and it was possible to speak one's mind, and there wasn't any hostility. It was just a sort of a good conversation. And then you ask, and then you mention victim mentality. I would predict that almost everyone would know what I'm talking about, and they would probably personally relate to it, and they would probably have strong opinions on it, one way or another. And this seems to indicate that while there is this victim mentality, which is very spread, we told it that's true, I think, there is also an awareness of this fact, which is widespread. So it means that we are to some extent aware of our mental limitations and victim mentality. Here's another example: putting other people in boxes, uh,
Anyway,
in boxes, categories,
okay, okay.
us versus them,
Yeah, like labels
othering,
or tribe versus tribe.
label.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. We do it, but we're also aware of the fact that we do it, and there seems to be a wish to transcend this. Um, what tribalism? Good example. Why is tribalism even a word? Like if nobody knew about this, tribalism wouldn't be aware. Just like if nobody cared about climate change, nobody would have followed Greta. So Greta's intelligence is relevant in the context she exists, because in this context, her intelligence created the movement. And that depended on her. It also depended on the environment being receptive to the message. So the thing that I'm coming to here is that it seems to be that, yes, we are having all of these self-limitations on our minds, and we're becoming increasingly aware of it. And we're becoming increasingly frustrated with it and wishing to escape it, which all in all seems to tell me that the real possibility of real evolution is truly present at the moment for people, and that it's not too late. It's closer
Did you
than
use the
ever.
term re-evolution? What is the last part you said?
We could use that term too. I was saying real evolution.
Oh, real evolution.
Actual, positive, intelligent, beautiful evolution of the human mind seems to actually be totally possible right now.
In my thought processes, Glenn, I go through the same chain as you, but I progress differently after that, right? Because sometimes people stop at the hopeful part, and then they don't apply this concept to analyze, let's say, that this is conforming with the observed behaviors of the norm. So for me, I observed this, but again, I'm saying this should have been 150 years ago, and it should have been that we actually had the types of intelligence to apply this metapsychology to, again, manage our own evolution. So again, it's a good sign, but how do we explain that people stop there? They stop there and they won't make the other. And again, where do they turn to? Well, if, let's say, my Humanix technology program would be a solution, well, it would have had to spread, like 50 years ago, that there were specialists around the world who could, when your train of thought goes this way, your life goes this way, your feelings, thought, interactions with others, here's choices of thinking tools where this would be the most favorable outcome, not just for you, but for the whole. Well, we don't have this, and we're so far from it. Of course, people will go to the victim personalities, the denial,
even though they know better, even though they don't want to. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and they actually, it's really hard for people to interact with me. And I've started to think that when people interact with me, I actually speed up their HSD infliction.
Okay,
because I think
that's important.
go even deeper in it. So it's almost like I can only interact with people indirectly, and they can take whatever they want and learn whatever they want. Because if I bring the metapsychology of their thinking and their actions, they need to go deeper, because they need to go hide even more in the hole of a lack of humanity, of a subhumanity part of their brain. Because the rest now, as I've now shown, because they thought maybe they had this much work to do before and it kept some hope. Now with me, and let's say they're uncoachable and it becomes argumentative, then I point out the gap between this is what Homo communia act like, and this is what an Homo sapien would act like.
And this is where the trouble starts.
Oh my God, I just made them worse.
Yeah, and this is where the trouble,
And again, what's the use? That's why when I realized this, as soon as I got the Doctor of Humanix persona, and I haven't explained why I call myself this yet, is I had to retire the poor guy right away, because nobody, even though they're all patients, nobody actually wants to do the work.
But so can we follow up on this? I think this is super important, because now we're right at something crucial. Because it reminds me a little earlier, I wanted to share with you a metaphor, which I think is interesting. And it's related to the story with my brother too. Let's say you have a door, and it's a big door, very, very thick, big door, and it's locked. And on the other side of the door is paradise, more or less, or at the very least, the entrance to paradise. Is it easy or is it difficult to get through the door? Is a question that's come up. And
what do you mean, get through the door?
Open the door.
You mean make the choice to go through, or?
Well, let's say you've already made the choice. Let's say you want to go through.
Oh, you mean like the opening part, the part of going from one premise to the other? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So this is interesting
Then
because
you're
when
talking about different kinds of choices. Some actually manifest in very powerful ways in people's lives. Like
let's
for
say,
me, when I moved from Quebec to Vancouver Island, I don't remember exactly how I made the choice, but I remember it was one of those powerful choices. It was made, and once it's made, all my micro choices and micro goals after that, they got into place, and it was almost like cruise control.
yeah,
It
yeah,
was almost like the choice was made, and I think it was a choice of desperation to survive and continue to evolve. I had to change environments, and just everything fell into place because I already had multiple types of intelligence, and I was willing to kind of learn as I go, and it just happened. Now some people every day they can't make a choice about what to eat for dinner. So there's different kinds of choices and different people's abilities and thinking tools to apply them. And
right,
sometimes some choices are different than other choices. For example, choosing to move to a different part of the country is very different than choosing which restaurant to go to, because one is life changing and it requires other choices to make it happen. One is overcoming a fear. One is learning a skill. One might incorporate two or three other people to collaborate. There's different kinds, but to go through that door, I'm not sure if you're going with your metaphor of fear of change or if you're
now
going,
I'll specify.
okay.
On this side of the door, you have your humanix program clearly in your mind as a coherent, full vision, beautiful
Okay,
vision.
let's say it's a true Homo sapien, and I
Yeah,
call myself
yeah,
the Homo sentient sapien for
yeah.
a reason I haven't explained yet.
And you're speaking with a person who, for whatever reason, seems to not quite have that knowledge, or at least not have actualized yet. So that's the first. That's in front of the door. On the other side of the door is the situation when you have shared with that person these ideas and it has been received fully and understood fully by that person and even truly appreciated, maybe to an extent that it would truly change their life. So that's the metaphorical door. Uh, the question that I asked was, let's say the door is shut. Is it easy or difficult to get through it? It's a somewhat meaningless question, actually, because let's say I have a million different keys and I don't even know where to begin, but 1,000 of them open the door. And if I have the right key, the door opens. So then it's not even a question of difficult or easy. It simply means that if I approach this person in the right way, there can be established a contact where a real understanding might happen. And the problem that you described there, by the way, I think is highly relevant. I can recognize it myself. I think it's actually fundamental to the very problem of evolution. How can one communicate a new idea to somebody without resistance? Because it's so often resistance. And that's where we really got to be smart. This is where I think we really have to, where people like us, the generalists, actually have to evolve our ability to communicate and do this effectively and listen, because we have something to learn as well from those other people because they have skills we don't have. So how can that be established? I think it's a very, very big, practically important question.
I think, Glenn, because you explained it a little bit differently, your metaphor the second time, so I'm still a little bit confused, but maybe you can write it to me because you write really well. And it could be the next talk, because then it's like a solution focused discussion that we could have. And they would get us to think about,
Yeah,
if we agree on a lot of the challenges to develop this potential to create the better world, let's talk about ideas. For example, I've joined eco villages, okay, and I see their life skills to interact with each other in honest, respectful ways with congruence, not incongruence, is totally lacking. And I've told some people, I said, it's great you're teaching the kids how to make their bow and arrows, start a fire. And you might be one of the last villages if there's a big earthquake on Vancouver Island to survive, but you'll eventually turn your bow and arrows and fire on each other like our ancestors, because you will not have human skills to collaborate and understand each other and relate to each other. And, you know, that's the way it is. So we have to find out what the solutions are. And a lot of people are posting things about growing food, which is not bad. But really, it's not the tipping point priority. It's why aren't we there yet? Why aren't they teaching this at school? And why aren't we doing petitions to say there should be a mandatory course on this in every school, and we're not leaving as parents until you're doing it? And if you say this and you don't leave, they're going to start getting scared of the politicians, and they're actually going to apply solutions that you gave them, because they don't know how to come up with solutions on their own, right? Because they're so busy facilitating the status quo, business as usual.
Yeah,
so we have to ask, if we have all the solutions, if we can feed everybody because there's enough food, why aren't we distributing it fairly? If there is this water, you know, and why are we kind of creating more water issues, and why is there going to be water wars in the future very likely? So why are we so backed up on our own mind and culture's evolution are the main questions. And I think I would like to address that. And I think your metaphor is a little bit the deeper psychology that we need to explore.
Yeah.
Because there are many, many things to do with climate change that could help, some that could make it worse. But again, it's the mind. Why are we applying them? Why will we spend 10 more years arguing which one to apply when it's already 10 years too late for certain? You know, what's explaining this? You know, and why will we do this kind of nonsense again if we solve things? You know, because we haven't really solved this part yet. We haven't balanced our newly evolved brains.
That's a super interesting question, and I think this was something that I wanted to bring up a little earlier as well. And I think it totally relates to all this. And this is certainly something that we can personally have experience about. And it has to do with, let's say, the cultural relationship between the outsider, or let's say the alternative thinker or thinkers, which is usually a small group which is very active. I think we're fairly in that group. And the, let's say, consensus rest of society, the official culture, the establishment culture, that there seems to be a fundamental tension between these radical change wanters, and they might have incredible ideas and solutions and insights, but there seems to be a cultural tension, and not even just a tension, but in many cases even a true contempt between these cultures and several other cultures as well, but particularly between, let's say, the culture of the avant-garde, cutting-edge thinkers and philosophers and big dreamers and visionaries, compared to, as we talk, the politicians, the establishment media, what they speak about, what the current normal is. And so how can that be how can that be bridged? I guess that's a question that seems very
well. There's many solutions. One of them is start at an earlier age, because a lot of people at that age, their worldviews are hard to shake. Their ways of thinking that are counterproductive about different people that think differently, or that, you know, that were raised in a different way. Because if you use science effectively, efficiently, and you teach it at a younger age, including applying it to the science of psychology, which is still very new because we've barely done any psychology advancement of that science, is we would notice, because what I'm noticing with kids around the world is that what used to be their average intelligence is now, you know, what used to be their borderline intelligence is now the average intelligence. And I'm saying, Wait, you're saying these are like I was talking to a lady in South Korea saying this group is not the borderline intelligence kids because I'm observing some some interactions and but it's everywhere in Canada. I've noticed that kids are falling behind on their human
Ah,
development. So
well, they're falling
so you
behind
do
on
this.
something, but
So
they
Glenn,
don't.
it has to be starting at a younger age because, for example, solutions won't be seen in our generation. We have to think long term. We have to think, education a lot because that's what makes us human, the right kind of education. We have
You
to
have to
think
think
about
long term.
helping the kids learn the right things because then they won't be arguing against things that are so ridiculous, because they'll be in the same naturalistic laws type of universe and they'll be applying the same solutions because they'll see the problems the same way. So
Yeah,
there'll be more collaborations.
okay, but here's the reason why I'm actually truly optimistic. Because I should actually make that clear. My basic point of view is actually more or less completely optimistic, actually. And in some sense, it's by choice because it's simply the smart way to go, I think. But it's an optimism which doesn't take it for granted anything. But the main reason why is simply because every single person that I've ever met and gotten to know relatively well, I've discovered very soon they have an incredible amount of wisdom and talent and a kind of inner brilliance, I would say.
Some of that wisdom is inherent from evolution from
It,
before.
yes, it is all coming from that because we are the result of this incredible story. So all of this is totally connected to the rest of the environment. But what it comes down to is that we do have truly magical abilities, and that's an understatement. It's actually not even an exaggeration to say that humans at the
I wouldn't
moment are magicians.
I don't want to use the term magician and magic because for me I think there's the potential for harm, and the reason
Oh,
for
yes,
that is
it is.
there are people that say the course I took in college showed how the evolution of cultures might be interpreted in the way that there was a religion, there was science, and there was magic. And societies more or less around the world sometimes varied between some of them dominating a little bit more. So for
Yeah.
me, magic, the concept of money that doesn't exist, for example, is an example of magic. Well, for me,
Yeah.
it's risky to go there. So instead of magical, I would say world changing potential
Yeah.
or powers or empowerment.
Yes.
We do have that. I believe that. And again, Glenn, I agree with you on our potential. What I don't agree is the probabilities of where we're headed based on previous choices and current choices.
Right. Okay. I really want to nail that point then, because this is maybe the crux of the issue. Um,
Between us and Glenn,
and not just
I
between
like
us.
that we balance each other in this way. I don't consider
Yeah.
myself negative, or I still think that, let's say, my way is more accurate to see things or more realistic or reflects the facts. But also, I believe that my way, if it does indeed reflect the facts more, and again, I have to review my own psychohistory, but there's data out there that we don't hear about that is, showing things. We don't want to do the research to prove what I'm saying. Nobody wants to do it. So, but if what I'm saying is true, I believe some people have to say it. Some people have to say what you say. Some people have to say what I say. But I believe that what I say can be more useful because if it brings us closer to what the actual situation we're in is, even if I'm
Yeah.
not popular, I'm okay with that.
Yes, of course.
Even if I'm poor and I don't sell any seats because nobody wants to hear, that there's a lot more work than they thought that had to be done. And again, what is the problem we're working on? Well, it
Yeah.
has to be, again, to minimize the suffering of the future generations and prepare for a more stable proto-civilization with the right kind of thinking tools.
Yes,
So,
exactly, exactly.
and I
So
wanted to ask you, how do you feel? Because if you have this, you call it optimistic, and maybe you'll call me a pessimist, but how do you feel interacting with me? Because it doesn't seem to drain you as much as it would other people, let's say. You seem to be able to absorb it.
well, I
Because
think it's
we could
great.
teach
I
that
think
in
it's
the next
great.
course.
I think it's
Eh?
great. Yeah, I love it because everything you say is based on real experience, real thoughts. It's completely true, relevant, the whole thing. It's just, I really don't want to lose this last point though, because when we come to this a crucial point when we're speaking, what we think is probable or not. The argument I'm saying is that the entire question, in a sense, seems to presuppose that this is predetermined. And I don't believe this to be true, that in fact, it's not decided yet. And I think we agree on that. It's just that the implications of that seems to be very huge, because the approach that I'm advocating, I guess, is that we look at the facts exactly as they are, which is the one you're advocating as well. Yet in our interpretations of the facts, to think of them with a consideration for the space of possibility and a determination to bring out the finest possible future. And this is where this approach, which begins with the facts, begins with things as they are, might actually move into something that seems very, let's say, almost delusional, perhaps. Something that is very hopeful, something that paints incredibly beautiful, perfect visions and says, we can do this, we can do that, we can do that.
Like The Secret, like almost, like believe and you'll help create it.
Yes. Formulating the vision of what is possible is in itself an action. And that's why I want to do that, because I don't know what's going to happen, but I want to do everything I can to maximize the chance of us being able to reach our potential. Because having looked at the facts, it seems to be true that our potential is incredibly huge, and it's not even far away. And if there's even a 1% chance that I'm correct about that, it's worth testing it. And I think it's more than a 1% chance. And it's not just worth testing it, it's worth dedicating a life to. And I'm dedicating my life to.
Len, can you be my lifelong friend?
Yeah, sure. Sounds like a good idea. Yeah.
I could use a brother. Aside from being a cool guy, just don't argue with me in the car. That'd be funny jokes. Let me drive. But anyways, I want to say a few things because I want to follow your life, because I want to see how you are applying your life's mission. And I think me and you are going to develop a respect, even though we have slightly different approaches to maybe having the same goal. Because really, I don't want people to die. I don't want kids to suffer. I don't want, desperation. I don't want people arguing for the two women shooting each other for the last diaper left in a store when they could just use an alternative to a diaper. That's insane. I don't want these things to happen, and some kid loses a mom for something crazy like this because we don't have the thinking tools. I don't want to see this. But let's say we're talking about carbon, okay? And people in Canada will say, "Oh, my neighbor and I'm going to go get a hybrid car too." Well, the hybrid car idea was like, it's too little, too late again. It should have been way before. Now, they want to believe, oh yeah, things are changing. So many people are saying this. Well, Canada is not cooperating with other countries on carbon target goals, and it's going to get worse. And in Canada, there's arguments about getting more jobs in oil. And between provinces about who should get it, and we sell the majority of it to the United States, which they could decide things at random to start a war and get most of their oil somewhere else or something like that, or pollute their own citizens more with fracking or whatever, right? They could. So again, are we applying this? We have a fake belief. Oh yeah, I want to believe. There's changes happening. Again, the too little, too late part needs to be understood. So I want to see, how your thinking evolves, because as a social scientist, I try to get in touch with ex-girlfriends, and it's not because I'm trying to get back together with them and they say, oh, I moved on, whatever. I just want to have like a 15-minute conversation, once a year or something, because I'm curious to see how their lives evolve based on, let's say, my own predictions, so that I could, advance my own understanding of the human mind. For example, when I was 19, I dated an older lady, and I predicted her life was going to go one way, and I didn't want to go there, and it did. And the victim personalities that I've seen a few of my ex-girlfriends get into is they're teaching it to their kids, and I see this growth. So I'm curious, and it's not to say I tell you so. It's to advance the science of how lives evolve based on choices, and how that changes culture, and to understand cultural evolution based on one person's life at a time, one decision at a time. And then that I could teach this even more and give examples in humanics training. So I'm curious to see how things go, and to learn even more about your life that I don't know from your bio, to see, the journey, because I can learn from that to say, hey, that's a viable idea or alternative description of this scenario. How did I not get to it? I had these struggles for years with this, or I had these bad experiences, and there were like multiple of them. So I kind of generalized some of my thinking about it. I can pick this up, but only with interactions and long-term case studies. But I can't just long-term case study my own life. I have to do it with more people. So again,
Yes.
even friendships that are, people don't talk to each other very often, but they have great conversations when they do, they're extremely useful to help psychology, metapsychology, and the understanding of cultural and personal families' evolution.
Probably.
So I look forward to that. And also, if there's another Thor movie, to go see it with you in Norway, because I saw one of the Thor movies in Norway that was filmed there as well.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah.
Should we come to our conclusion soon?
I think so. Yeah. It was just one point which just I wanted to remark when you said, so why hasn't this humanatrix program spread yet to the extent that it deserves or is possible? And it came to me that a short answer might be because it's so big. And when I say big, I really mean in its scope.
The idea of it, you mean? Or
yeah,
how it's different than the paradigm where parents, no,
yeah.
my kids are learning what they need at school. You don't need any other training, even if it's free. Because that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
it's freaking free, and I
Hmm.
invite them to come observe, and they think I'm just a babysitter. So
Well,
that's pretty sad. That's pretty sad.
It's because this idea that you have is so revolutionary in the sense that it is potentially
But
complete
that's
world.
sad. It's sad that it's revolutionary. It should have been the norm a long time ago.
Well, maybe it's not even sad. Maybe that is just actually what we would have to expect, because that sort of a breakthrough will only happen once in human history. And it might just take some time for us to be ready for it, because it's such a leap. And I think that many people like us who have been working on these ideas for many years, we underestimate how um, how transformative, totally transformative it would be if that idea was to be fully implemented. So there might be
Glenn?
mechanisms. Yeah, just to
sorry, continue.
Yeah. So
there might be mechanisms.
There might be mechanisms in nature and even in culture which protect us from being exposed to versions of this too early, which are not quite ready yet.
As a species.
Yes, and that what this means is that these super big ideas, they may actually need to be evolved to a certain level before they can be received. And that makes sense.
Like perfecting the science before the norm accepts it or something.
You're preparing the ground, so to say, for this.
Glenn, what you say makes sense to me. Like, it's a phenomenon that I think is possible, but I don't understand why people shy away from it so much. I remember that doing personal development work is hard. Looking at yourself in the mirror, taking really growing up, really. And because some people live their entire lives without growing up, without really understanding the concept of responsibility over their own lives and how they have an impact on others. Too many people, I would say 9 out of 10 again, don't reach human levels. So I remember when I was taking life skills courses with a wonderful lady in Duncan on Vancouver Island, and she's retired now. And I remember taking these courses and thinking, why, knowing intuitively this was incredibly important training. And why did I not learn this? Well, of course, parents might be able to role model it if they had it. My parents didn't, these skills, but still, it should have been at the level they could role model it and explain it and teach it. And then, kids discuss it and they get even better at it. And this would be at a time, let's say you're interacting with somebody and there's a trigger and you observe your own thoughts and feelings and how your body's responding to it. And then you observe different choices of how you can react and choose not just what is best for you, but what is best for your community. Now, this kind of stuff is hard, but it's possible. And it takes the choice of, hey, I'm taking this course. Some people are afraid of horseback riding. They'll do it. And they have the same kind of challenge to overcome than a human X technology training. And yet they do that. So, and I think the greater scope of why more people are afraid of this, even if they don't have to pay anything, if I want to volunteer and I want to train people, is something to explore. So I'm asking you, help me perfect it. I'm going to give Norway a chance, and I want to go and teach a course with you as my co-facilitator. And when we've done a few together, you can teach it in your language of the country. And that's what I've been wanting to travel the world in big part to do, is to, in different Asian countries, have somebody that's bilingual enough that will co-facilitate a few of these with me. And it's just part-time to a maximum of 250 hours in 1 year. It's not that big a commitment. I mean, some people do karate and give it up, and even before they give it up, they do a lot more hours than that. So, but this is to become human. It's for you and your kids to become human, to have the thinking tools to not just help be part of the solution, but also to survive or be resilient or help mitigate what is coming. And this, you don't just need to care about your kids. You need to care about yourself. You need to care about your futures. You need to care about the planet. You need to care about right and wrong. And it's about doing the right thing, whether there's a heaven waiting for you or not. It's about altruism, which is what those first two cells that created us have decided to do by becoming friends,
Yeah, exactly. That's when the two worlds joined together and became a larger new kind of a world.
Eukaryotes.
Yes. Yeah, I really feel that whole issue is a very, very big, important question, which we should just continue going into. It's no point trying to pretend it's solved easily. It's a big question. And I mean, I just also want to point out that even though clearly we should act now in a sense, and I think we are acting now by just being involved with this research is probably the most important action which is possible to help the situation, I think. It is necessary actually with some patience here, because it's like if you're going to become a doctor of mathematics, let's say, even if it's a very obscure field, then it's probably going to take you 10 years or even more with a lot of very rigorous research to even begin.
And what I'm talking about is so much less time and work than this.
I know.
And it's rewarding because these skills are transferable to different aspects of life. And when they're incorporated with metapsychology and accountability, they spread into communities. But again, it's just enough people making the choice to commit to this. And it's not going to hurt with other challenges we'll have to face, because when we have these thinking tools, climate change solutions, collaborations for that, or anything else that might happen in the future, like an asteroid on its way here or whatever, or just, a virus or something that evolves in a way that we really need, the majority of countries to collaborate to keep things under control or whatever. So,
Yeah,
these collaboration type skills, they have no choice to be our priority right now because of the world that we've designed, how much of us there are, how
yeah,
even our livestock and the way we have domesticated their environments could create illnesses that could, sabotage us if we're, not, even if we did move away from a more meat regulated
exactly.
diet.
So collaboration is necessary, and the hindrances we've already
And
put
it's
ourselves on.
less,
It's
it's some people actually take these power life skills workshops and pay thousands of dollars for a weekend. They say it was great, blah, blah, blah. And then, maybe 6 months later, they're not applying any of the skills anymore because they're not in a community that role
I
models
think
or makes it user friendly to do it. And then they don't understand that it is something they have to keep refreshing.
yes.
They
Now
have
I'm
to keep
jumping.
doing programs like this every 5 years or so, and they get something new out of it, and they keep growing, and it refreshes. They have what I call a reepiphanies, and it's a very important part of being human. But
Yeah,
it's not that hard, and it can be fun, and it should already have been the norm. Why do we
yeah.
create scenarios of religious traditional behaviors where so many people spend so much of their time doing it, but we don't do that when it comes to being human?
Hmm.
It comes to, supernatural entities and things like that, and it's not related to us in the same way as to, value or cherish or have respect for ourselves, or love ourselves, love the best that humanity has to offer. Well, for that, you have to bring it out. You have to do the work.
We have to bring it out exactly, and that's what needs to be done. And now I'm jumping ahead of myself a little, but I think that one of the parts of the solution is that there needs to be a really continuous stream of events and follow-ups and new events and follow-ups for these skills to really be developed. And
And I'm willing to
hmm.
dedicate the rest of my life to something like this.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah, same
again,
here.
I can't do this by myself. There needs to be
Exactly.
participants, there needs to be co-facilitators, there needs to be venues.
But please
And
keep in mind that we are not alone here. I mean, there are loads of people working on this right now all over the world who want exactly the same thing, and they're having very similar conversations, and they're considering similar ideas. So these networks, they are ready to be formed. What is lacking is the tools for organizing them, as you say.
see, when you say that, it's worth so much more to me than somebody giving me a pamphlet wanting me to pick up their worldview because it's so hopeful and there's a better world, blah, 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 but there's no solutions and they contradict themselves. When I'm outside of a place in Vancouver, I get a Jehovah's Witness, two young ladies give me a pamphlet. And
Mm,
they just need to give it to me. They don't mind if I drop it and they see me drop it on the ground. I wouldn't litter like this, but they still feel like they've saved their soul as long as somebody
yeah,
picks it up. They've done their part.
they've done
And
their
yet,
part.
when I ask them to actually, do something like let me borrow their phone or something so I could call a hostel so I have a place to stay or something like that, they won't do it. So they're contradicting their own moral system that they just need to push me the pamphlet. It's that easy now. Just give me the pamphlet, watch me drop it or somebody drop it, and they're going to heaven. And of course, they won't know if they're right or wrong. They're dead. Their brains are shut down. So
Yes, yes.
so for me, it's like, but wait, you have these values, but you have a phone. It's not even long. So, I show them that they're actually not doing the practical part, but it's okay because they only need to do the theory part. And every religion is like this. And even humanists are like this now. So, and this
Yeah,
is
so let's.
HSD that predicted this. And HSD also predicted that when things get worse in the next years, more people will go towards religions, except more and more people will define it differently or practice it differently within the same religion. So it's like a
Hmm.
culture losing its language. A religion will lose its definition and meaning because it'll be so vague and generalized and inconsistent. But people will need to go in that type of denial instead of taking action, because taking action is for the few, like Greta. And that's not what's going to make the world a better place. It's the taken action by the majority. And it's not the pamphlet what it says,
But it,
because the wisdom has always been there. We've had
yeah, yeah, the
people
original
for
source.
thousands of years, who say this is the solution and the right way to do things. It's why we're not putting it in practice. That's what we
But
have to solve.
if we have, because we already have millions of people certainly that see the need for it. They see big parts of the solution. They really want to go into these collaborations. And so when these groups, and I'm saying when here, once again, when these groups get really organized and organized well, that can create this intelligence, which is enough to
Yeah,
become
but
a
the
critical
organizing
mass.
well part requires some of that intelligence at the beginning, right?
Yeah,
So,
of course,
yes.
and that's already here. I mean, I think that it's already a lot of
Now,
intelligence.
if you're talking about other groups that you were talking about, again, Glenn, I'm very excited that you're inviting me to the other Facebook group or any other people. And you also talked about a podcast that I'd like for you to write down because I wasn't sure what you were, how you were saying it. So write that
Yeah,
for me later. And for me, it's past 8:30, Glenn.
yeah,
Uh,
we should
s-
wrap it
I
up
think that
now, I think.
we're almost maybe 2 hours of the recording time. We started talking a little bit early about how it would go. But maybe I'll do my conclusion now and you can do yours. And I wrote a few things down and I don't need to say everything, but I did come up with a cool quote when I was listening to Daniel C. Dennett. And HSD is what I call Homo sapien domestication. And because the human animal is domesticating the human animal, we're not really developing a Homo sapien operating system. But HSD allows the blissful lack of awareness of the ones in the majority and their incompetence. So they're not aware, the majority. So it's a cultural illness that is, and it's the same when, when let's say people thought the earth was flat and some minority says it's round, and people fight the change, and then, there's discriminations. The people that say it's round, they suffer from a kind of species alienation, and the rest, they just not want to hear anything different because it requires thinking. So HSD allows the blissful lack of awareness of the majority's incompetence. Therefore, it is greatly mimicked or reproduced for its path of least resistance among social creatures, avoiding the accountability of their own cultural evolution. So for me, HSD, I've said, it's a cultural disease. But of course, what is a culture? It's people. It's people that allow themselves to be domesticated out of their own humanity to become worker bees or ant soldiers or whatever it is. So for me, I know that as times get hard, it'll increase. HSD will increase. People going for religions, as I said, will increase. Denial, victim personalities, all these things will increase. And there'll be more fighting and isolation even within individual families. I mean, it's happening more and more. People living in the same house hardly know anything about each other. They're in their same rooms on their phone or doing their own feelings of thinking their life is great because it's better than the person on the reality TV show they're watching. So there's really no human families in these houses anymore. They're really fancy decorations, and really new stuff. But it's not more human than a chimpanzee community in the forest that has been getting along for a long time. For me, I was
Keep in
saying that
mind, we
humanity
cannot
is
see
not.
all the houses. Yeah.
Pardon?
Yeah, just keep in mind we can't see all the houses, so we don't know what's going on in there.
We can't see what's in the houses. Yes, sometimes some things are so much worse than what chimpanzees would do. And of course, that's not always in the news. But so for me, a chimpanzee community that is more stable, even if they do things a different way, and most of them, let's say, receive social connection or affection and are fed and help each other and share. And, they might not be able to, light a cigarette for themselves or whatever people are still thinking makes them human, because clothes and cigarettes and drinking in a lot of Asian cultures is a normal human behavior. And for me, I tell you, it's proof that there's so many more species intelligent than the Homo communion. So again, how do we evaluate intelligence is very important. And I think just realizing that there is a kind of mental illness, that's what I'm talking about with HSD theory, is it's a kind of mental illness that goes against the evolution of cultures, and it affects the majority. It's always the majority, and it grows and it gets more intense, and it prevents changing paradigms. It crashes attempts at proto civilizations. It causes regression. And again, I'm saying that this part of history, when our technology has evolved this deadly and has spread this much, the number of weapons and toxins and biological weapons and paranoia that is accompanied, and number of people that have guns and paranoia, is like it's never happened before. So climate change is real, but I tell you, HSD is a hell of a lot more deadly to people's way of life than climate change will ever be.
Whoa, that's great. And I think
No, it's not.
well,
I feel for that. I feel bad. I work with kids. I care for them, and I see they're growing in communities that are less and less human. And I go work with these kids that are 3 to 5 year olds, and they see how I'm different. My thinking's different. My behavior is different. And I see in their eyes intuitively. I think they know I need to spend more time with this dude, because I intuitively, my DNA is kind of telling me I need to develop a human operating system, But again, the obstacles, because HSD has progressed so much now, that a
well,
black sheep doesn't get to stay in a job for a long time, So I'm unemployable because of my scientific theories in psychology, and how
yeah,
I can't sell my humanity for a paycheck. I have to stand by them. So I'm not popular saying that the earth is not flat.
no,
I'm not.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I think it is great in a sense is that we are, first of all, aware of the fact that we have many psychological limitations, which you call HSD, is basically habitual psychological self-limiting obstacles to evolution, as you say, can be seen as a test of evolution, can be seen as natural resistance to evolution, so that it's an obstacle which is intended to be overcome at the right time.
It could become a slingshot, but
Yes,
again,
right.
I believe otherwise. And again, I'd love to maybe hang out with you and
Yeah.
maybe see my
So
worldview.
what I believe is that that's inherently a possibility, that it is inherently something that could become a slingshot, just like all other problems could be turned on their head and transformed into the transcendence of that stage. But in any case, however we choose to interpret it, what has become very clear in this conversation is that we both have the point of view that it is the psychological conditioning of humanity which is the obstacle and the opportunity. Um,
Holy
and
crap, Glenn, nicely put. That is something we really agree on, and it's well said in a short sentence. Nice.
yeah, I think it's a good way to look at it. It is the obstacle and therefore the opportunity if we can really see it and transcend it. And
I
so
like that glass half full. I
yeah,
think I can resonate with that. It's nice. Thank you.
thanks. Okay, I'll actually then do my little summary too, but I really think that touched the basic issue. And there was something that I wanted to read earlier, which was in my notes, and I think I'll read it now. And that was Dennett's idea of evolution as research and development. And I'm here quoting what he said: a design process which exploits information in the environment to create, maintain, and improve the design of things.
The what of things?
The
Improve the
design, design,
design. Yeah, 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 yeah.
yes, with research and development taking time and energy, and variables in this process is what he calls two major strands of evolution, which work in fundamentally different ways. And one
Mhm.
of them is evolution by natural selection, and the other is evolution by human intelligent design, is how he describes it. Which is something different from the obstacle we talked about. This would be an example of intelligent human design, which also has happened and has become more and more intelligent in some
It,
respects.
it's happening. It's just people
Yeah,
aren't designing the same thing, and it's sometimes opposing each other. Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of messy and many things. And he also said something very interesting about the characteristics of slow natural evolution and evolution through human intelligent design. Natural evolution in nature through natural selection has the following typical characteristics. It does not have foresight. It doesn't know what will happen down the line. In a sense, it's almost completely blind. It is extremely costly. Many poor organisms will die and go through pains and die and perish childless. And only very few will go on a long time. It is also very slow. It goes over billions and billions of years is what has brought us here. And evolution by natural selection is brilliant. It creates the most unbelievably cunning and brilliant and smart and clever designs. And this is what can be seen all over nature. Even trees having reasons for why they do what they do, even while those reasons aren't represented to the trees. And this is contrasted to what he describes as the characteristics of human intelligent design, which is, first of all, it now exists in certain strands and is becoming ever more intelligent in certain ways. It is relatively foresightful, although often not as much as we think it is. And we're not always capable of really knowing the effects of what we create, but we at least try to consider it. It is governed by cost considerations, human intelligent design, so we try not to waste energy, and it's relatively fast compared to evolution in nature, even though here also it's maybe not as fast as we expect it to be. And for example, he uses the example of software. Software's projects usually take longer than you expect them to take, even when you expect them to take longer than you expect them to take. So this is where I want to put these together. And I want to point towards the big possibility that Dennett's ideas is also pointing towards, which is the hybrid. And that is when human intelligent design begins to use more and more of the principles that we see in nature, as well as systems that utilize randomness, with deep learning algorithms being the example Dennett offers. So certain kinds of systems where we emulate processes from nature, while there is also a supervision where it is an intelligent human design that can take place. And in the hybrids, this is where I believe the real breakthrough is, and probably the only path. Just like in the co-evolution of human intelligence and machines, computers, so-called AI, along with this. That these two, they don't seem to be unrelated. That it seems that human intelligence and mind and behaviors goes along with the development of what we call AI. They can't be separated in any way. And in the same way, what we call AI, the tools, the computers influence us back. So it's a co-symbiotic relationship already. And one of the things that we want to figure out is how to evolve them together so that we can create a human-machine interaction which is really symbiotic and harmonious. And if we can do that, then we can solve all problems. But it needs to begin with our own minds.
Or we can do problem solving, because again, when it comes to evolution, we need to learn and tweak here, tweak there, adjust things, reapproach the the problem from a different angle at some point. It's ongoing work, which is one way to prove sometimes there's no God, because the universe is evolving and changing. So a designer would have to be either involved but he's hiding it in the ongoing process, or
Or
he
he just made a
probably
system.
didn't know what he was creating. He probably just started an experiment and walked away.
Yeah,
And it's up
or
to us to decide what. Yeah.
maybe created
So,
something that can take care of itself at some point, you know.
well, I really like Robert Sawyer, who's presently, although I'm challenging him a little bit. Hi, Robert. Robert Sawyer, a Canadian author, has won a lot of awards, who is on my Facebook friend list. And he has a book I just finished reading. I don't know if it's the fifth time now, called Calculating God. And we can talk about that next time, because in there's some scenarios where civilizations on other planets that have gone and can be found, disappeared, have evolved a certain way. They get to a stage of their culture where they have to make a choice, such as us. People say, right, we're at a tipping point with technology, nuclear power, if we're going to destroy ourselves or not. And people use the word transcend, but they define that in different ways. So the different ideas of how a culture could survive a particular stage of going from fire to technology that can kill itself is what are the alternate. Maybe we can have a discussion about that at some point. Again, it
That
would
would be
be
great.
how to address the solutions. Now,
Yeah.
I'd like to give a heads up to a scientist that I admired a lot, called Lynn Margulies, and she, talked a lot about the science. She came up with a lot of science that Daniel Dennett was referencing in this talk, with her theory on endosymbiosis and all that. So Lynn Margulies, she passed away when I was in my master's degree during that time, and I kind of dedicated one of my letters to her, to my faculty. And so she, I don't know her in her personal life. Again, I assume she's a scientist that might not have done her own psychohistory to advance her science as much as she could, because of, various forms of intelligence that might not have been developed at the same level as their, let's say, research skills. I don't know, right? But I just want to say that she was in a man's world, but also a world of people just wanted to say Darwin had everything right, when Darwin was just contributing to a portion of our understanding of evolution. And you talked about different ways, but there's even other ways, and I'd love to explore the ideas of other ways that
Oh
evolution
yeah,
works, and
absolutely.
how, and because we can't really help it evolve unless we understand what's already in place, and things like that. But that's at a level where we think we're going to become godlike, when we're really at a tipping point where we might not even finish stabilizing our own brains, which are fairly new structures,
Oh
biologically
yes,
speaking, on the planet,
yes.
and they're not biochemically balanced yet.
True.
And
Yes.
there's a lot of ways that we need to incorporate this in humanist technology training, is understanding of our own brain, nourishing them properly,
Oh
understanding
yeah.
how they evolve more, how they respond to different environments, things like this. We need to not just teach skills on how to get along. We need to teach about our brains.
Oh yeah.
There's three very important topics for intelligent species to learn. One is themselves, not just the brain, but themselves.
Yeah, the whole
And
self. Know
and
yourself.
also the very small, the very big, and
Mm.
how, so Margulies, she, brought the micro to the macro of James Lovelock and his Gaia theory, and they worked together. But, their work should have gone faster and should have found more networking collaborations, but it found more resistance. And again, it was because of personalities
Mm.
limiting
Oh
the
yeah.
advance. Again,
And that's one of the
I,
practical issues we'll definitely
I've
go.
written this, that a good scientist will never be a good scientist unless they do their own personal development work, because you need to
Yes.
do that to achieve, let's say, full objectivity, which is very important in science. So,
Oh
hey,
yeah.
Glenn, I thank you a lot. I'm
This
glad
was
I got
great.
to remember to thank Lynn Margulies for her work. She was married at some point to Carl
Yeah.
Sagan in the summer, and
Super great.
she went against the norm, and it might be later in her life or after their death, sometimes people are acknowledged, and that's sad. Again, that tells us how slow we are to admit that we had role models among us, and people to learn from, and we discriminate more during their lifetime, or we cause more hardship for them. I mean, look at Rachel Carlson. I mean, did she possibly, she got cancer. She could have lived longer, but I mean, part of her cancer might have been made worse by the type of research she did to help us understand more about how modernity if it's not, understood as a concept properly in evolving cultures, can be more our destruction than our evolution. And she did a lot of work to help us understand our relationship to the environment and how to help with things. And yet she might have, in doing this work, she might have, been more susceptible to the developing kinds of cancers, maybe. But for a scientist to not walk the talk, and that's what I criticized my own faculty for when I fired them in my master's degree on Vancouver Island, is I said, you guys don't talk the talk. You just talk the talk. You don't walk the talk. I mean, you have more to learn from me than I do from you. And it's like I can just read a couple of books, and you even say, when you give us things to read, you say just skim it. You don't even expect us to really understand it. Come on. All right, I'm paying for this. Come on, seriously. So there needs to be more respect in science for the people that actually, when they find out some things, they come up with results, they have recommendations, they dedicate the rest of their lives to applying these solutions. And these are the people that, deserve, more, they deserve sainthood, or more than just a Nobel Prize. They deserve, a great human. They deserve that after their death, there's a day in the year where every country celebrates their contribution. While they were on this planet, they didn't, let's say, consume more than they gave. Instead of all these supernatural entities, they get these outdated, celebrations that are more on consumption now, or belonging to a tribe, which creates tribe versus tribe, than actually acknowledging real people that we have now living among us, or that have recently died, that actually have contributed so much. And Lynn Margulies is one, James Lovelock, I admire him, and there's a few other people that I'm glad that Daniel referenced to, because even though they might have done and said a lot of things people disagree with, they still had ideas. They were outside of the norm, and they were right, and they were hard to take, but they had the courage to state these ideas, and at a time that did not make them popular. It's easy to be popular and state it and ride the wave of the paradigm change, right? It's easy to be the surfer that's, oh my God, this is, and then go down in history. This is the guy. No, come on, look at all these people that suffered here. Witches got burned at the stake for saying this 100 years ago. Come on. So this is a way we would know we're approaching a stable proto-civilization, is we honor the right role models in our celebrations around the world. Right?
Yes, I think that's what we need to do now, actually, where we begin to honor the right model.
Are you saying there's going to be an Asgardian Thor, Odin, Loki day in Norway now?
I don't know.
Thor, Loki was not too bad in the Avengers movies.
Yeah. I don't think there's a day like that now, but
between you and your brother, who's Thor and who's Loki?
Wow, I don't know.
Don't answer. If it gets you in trouble, don't answer.
Yeah.
Just save my dad's.
Maybe I'm Loki, I guess.
You're who? You're what?
Loki, perhaps.
You are?
I don't know. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Well, anyway, this was great, and I think we already have sort of staked out a good topic. So for the next talk, because this is super interesting to just keep.
Do I have to wear a shirt next time? Because you make me look bad wearing a shirt. Oh man.
Maybe I just need to not wear a shirt. We can wear whatever we want. So
I don't need to shave. My beard is in honor of Jonathan Livingston Seagull. See, our minds are blending. His mind is up here with mine. We're both lifelong learners, learning from. Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Check that out. His book was probably translated in your language there. So it was actually, I just recently found that it was also in Japanese, and it is in Korean, and it's been a very popular book, and it encourages lifelong learning. So it's very important. I try to promote it with teachers and students.
Whoa, yeah.
So this is my little seagull mustache, okay?
Seagull mustache, yeah, it looks good. Good facial hair. And before we end the recording, I actually have one idea which I haven't even mentioned once this conversation, and I think I'm just going to plant it as a seed at the end and let it hang in the air. And it was an idea which came to me very strongly yesterday as I listened to the talk with Dennett. That this idea put together with the ideas of Dennett suddenly make those ideas much more meaningful in a different way. And this idea is that information and maybe even organic life and what we call matter is essentially patterns of movement in space, like music. So the idea is that life is made of music. I think that's the simple way to formulate it. And I'm just throwing it out at the end here. So maybe we'll think about it. And that seems to go well along with the rest. And this conversation has, of course, been a very wonderful musical in itself.
You have a better headset than me. I broke mine couple of weeks ago. I don't have the money to fix it, but if I go back to Canada, I know the company that sold me this is very good at honoring warranties even after a while. So, but right now, right now, the music I listen to is when I go to karaoke here. But I understand your point, and I do understand that relationships between not just matter or energy, but concepts. How they interact with each other. Yeah, you can make grand unification theories in both cosmology and the social sciences with this kind of approach. Relationships between things, and
moving.
And again, if we want to break it down to a simple science, it's cybernetics. But cybernetics becomes so complex that there's no way you can explain what cybernetics is and then apply it to something so big. You have to really progress a lot in that two people can be in the same conversation and go from the basic premise of cybernetics, which could be just simple information exchange relationships, to something as complex as social grand unification theories or cosmology. But relationships, again, collaboration, again, we're not the center of the universe. All these things that are less anthropocentric will just make us do a lot more progress, like ecocentrism and just understanding that we're all interconnected.
We might need more than just one conversation before we really figure out the grand unification theory. But I think we've already found some very good seeds that might get us there. So, so on that note, thanks.
Thank you, Glenn.
And till next time, we will continue the conversation. And with that, I finish the recording.
I'm finishing mine too as well now. And